Welcome. Tonight, we will listen to a long and gentle reading of Moby-Dick by Herman Melville. This is a calm and quiet audiobook created for sleep and relaxation. Please find a comfortable position and let your breathing slow down. Now, let us begin our voyage. Call me Ishmael. Some years ago, never mind how long, precisely having little or no money in my purse, and nothing particular to interest me on shore, I thought I would sail about a little and see the watery part of the world. It is a way I have of driving off the spleen and regulating the circulation. Whenever I find myself growing grim about the mouth, whenever it is a damp, drizzly November in my soul, whenever I find myself involuntarily pausing before coffin warehouses and bringing up the rear of every funeral I meet, and especially whenever my thoughts so strongly take hold of me that it requires a strong moral principle to prevent me from deliberately stepping into the street and methodically knocking people's hats off, then I account it high time to get to sea as soon as I can. This is my substitute for pistol and ball. With a philosophical flourish, Cato throws himself upon his sword. I quietly take to the ship. There is nothing surprising in this, if they but knew it. Almost all men in their degree, some time or other, cherish very nearly the same feelings towards the ocean with me. There now is your insular city of the Manhattoes, belted round by wharves as Indian isles by coral reefs. Commerce surrounds it with her surf. Right and left, the streets take you waterward. Its extreme downtown is the Battery, where that noble mole is washed by waves and cooled by breezes which a few hours previous were out of sight of land. Look at the crowds of water gazers there. Circumambulate the city of a dreamy Sabbath afternoon. Go from Corlear's Hook to Coenties Slip, and from thence, by surmise, northward. What do you see? Posted like silent sentinels all around the town, stand thousands upon thousands of mortal men fixed in ocean reveries, some leaning against the spiles, some seated upon the pier heads, some looking over the bulwarks of ships from China, some high aloft in the rigging, as if striving to get a still better seaward peep. But these are all landsmen, of weekdays pent up in lath and plaster tied to counters, nailed to benches, clinched to desks. How then is this? Are the green fields gone? What do they hear? But look, here come more crowds, pacing straight for the water, and seemingly bound for a dive. Strange, nothing will content them but the extremest limit of the land. Loitering under the shady lee of yonder warehouses will not suffice. No, they must get just as nigh the water as they possibly can without falling in. And there they stand, miles of them, leagues, inlanders all. They come from lanes and alleys, streets and avenues, north, east, south, and west. Yet here they all unite. Tell me, does the magnetic virtue of the needles of the compasses of all those ships attract them thither? Once more, say you are in the country, in some high land of lakes. Take almost any path you please, and 10 to 1 it carries you down in a dale and leaves you there by a pool in the stream. There is magic in it. Let the most absent-minded of men be plunged in his deepest reveries, stand that man on his legs, set his feet a-going, and he will infallibly lead you to water, if water there be in all that region. Should you ever be athirst in the great American desert, try this experiment. If your caravan happen to be supplied with a metaphysical professor, yes, as every one knows, meditation and water are wedded forever. But here is an artist. He desires to paint you the dreamiest, shadiest, quietest, most enchanting bit of romantic landscape in all the valley of the Saco. What is the chief element he employs? There stand his trees, each with a hollow trunk, as if a hermit and a crucifix were within. And here sleeps his meadow, and there sleep his cattle, and up from yonder cottage goes a sleepy smoke. Deep into distant woodlands winds a mazy way, reaching to overlapping spurs of mountains bathed in their hillside blue. But though the picture lies thus tranced, And though this pine tree shakes down its sighs like leaves upon this shepherd's head, yet all were vain unless the shepherd's eye were fixed upon the magic stream before him. Go visit the prairies in June, when for scores on scores of miles you wade knee-deep among tiger lilies. What is the one charm wanting? Water. There is not a drop of water there. Were Niagara but a cataract of sand, would you travel your 1,000 miles to see it? Why did the poor poet of Tennessee, upon suddenly receiving the handfuls of silver, deliberate whether to buy him a coat, which he sadly needed, or invest his money in a pedestrian trip to Rockaway Beach? Why is almost every robust, healthy boy with a robust, healthy soul in him, at some time or other, crazy to go to sea? Why upon your first voyage as a passenger did you yourself feel such a mystical vibration? When first told that you and your ship were now out of sight of land, why did the old Persians hold the sea holy? Why did the Greeks give it a separate deity, and own brother of Jove? Surely all this is not without meaning. And still deeper the meaning of that story of Narcissus, who, because he could not grasp the tormenting, mild image he saw in the fountain, plunged into it and was drowned. But that same image we ourselves see in all rivers and oceans. It is the image of the ungraspable phantom of life, and this is the key to it all. Now, when I say that I am in the habit of going to sea whenever I begin to grow hazy about the eyes, and begin to be overconscious of my lungs, I do not mean to have it inferred that I ever go to sea as a passenger. For to go as a passenger, you must needs have a purse, and a purse is but a rag unless you have something in it. Besides, passengers get seasick, grow quarrelsome, don't sleep of nights, do not enjoy themselves much. As a general thing, no, I never go as a passenger, nor, though I am something of a salt, do I ever go as a commodore or a captain or a cook. I abandon the glory and distinction of such offices to those who like them. For my part, I abominate all honorable, respectable toils, trials, and tribulations of every kind whatsoever. It is quite as much as I can do to take care of myself, without taking care of ships, and crews, and boats, and oil, and bone, and blubber, and all the rest of it. At last, after much wandering among the wharves and warehouses, I came to the part of the town where sailors most commonly lodge. The air there was thick with the smell of tar and salt, and the narrow streets were crowded with signs of inns and taverns. Their names swung from rusty hinges and creaked softly in the wind. I first entered one house whose door stood wide open and whose windows glowed with a yellow light. But inside, the noise was loud and rough, and the faces I saw were not those of men who sleep easily. So I turned away and walked farther on. The night had now fully come. Snow began to fall in slow, quiet flakes, and the wind pressed it against my face. The lamps along the street burned dimly, and the sound of my steps seemed to echo more than before. Soon I found myself before a small, crooked building, its sign painted with a strange image, a tall white spout rising from a dark sea. Beneath it were the words, "The Spouter Inn, Peter Coffin." The name was curious, and the picture more so, but the place looked warm enough. I pushed open the door and stepped inside. A wide room opened before me, low-ceilinged and heavy with smoke. On the walls hung old weapons, long spears and harpoons, darkened with age. A great fireplace stood at one end, and before it sat a group of men, their backs turned to the door, their faces lit by the red glow of the fire. The warmth struck me at once, and I felt the cold leave my hands and face. I stood for a moment, letting my eyes grow used to the light. Then I saw the landlord, a thin man with pale hair and a small smile. He told me that all the beds were taken, except one. That one, however, must be shared with a stranger who had not yet returned for the night. I hesitated. To share a bed with an unknown sailor was not entirely pleasing, yet the cold outside, the long walk, and the lateness of the hour persuaded me. I agreed to take the place. While waiting for my bedfellow to return, I sat near the fire and watched the men around me. They spoke of distant voyages and strange sights upon the sea. Their voices were low and slow, and their words rose and fell like the waves they described. At length, the landlord returned and told me that the man who was to share my bed was a harpooner, lately come from a long voyage. He carried his own weapons and followed customs unknown to most. This did not greatly comfort me, yet there was no other lodging to be found. So I went up the narrow stairs to the small room prepared for us. The room was plain and dark, with a single window rattling in the wind. In one corner stood a large wooden bed, and beside it a small table with a candle. I undressed and lay down, though sleep did not come at once. My thoughts remained busy with the strange house, and the strangers soon to arrive. At last I heard a heavy step upon the stair. The door opened, and a tall figure entered the room. In the dim light I saw a man of dark skin and broad chest, carrying a bundle of long, sharp weapons over his shoulder. He set them carefully in a corner, then turned toward the bed. For a moment we both stood still, looking at one another. He seemed surprised to find the bed already occupied, and I was equally surprised to see such a figure standing beside me. But soon his face softened, and he spoke in a calm voice. Though his words were strange, his meaning was clear enough. He had no wish to disturb me, and meant only to sleep. Thus, with little ceremony, we shared the same bed that night. In the quiet darkness, I observed him more closely. His skin was marked with curious patterns, his head shaved except for a narrow strip of hair, and his bearing was both calm and dignified. He seemed not a savage, but a man of another world, guided by customs older than mine. When morning came, I found that I felt no fear of him at all. Instead, a strange sense of companionship had grown between us. We spoke more freely, and he told me his name, Queequeg. He was bound for the sea, as I was, not as a passenger, but as a harpooner. His life belonged to the ocean, and he followed it with a quiet certainty. We ate together in the common room below, among the other sailors. The snow had ceased, and pale light entered through the windows. Queequeg handled his tools with care, and spoke little, but his presence was steady and calm. It seemed to me that fate had chosen this companion for me, though neither of us had planned it. From that night forward, we walked together through the town, seeking the ship that would carry us both from land. Our steps led us again toward the harbor, where the ships waited in silence, their masts rising against the pale sky. After breakfast, Queequeg and I walked once more toward the harbor. The snow had ended, and the air was clear and cold. The streets were quieter than before, and the sounds of the town seemed distant, as if they belonged to another life already left behind. Ships lay along the piers in long rows, their hulls dark against the pale water. We passed many vessels, small boats built for short trips, merchant ships heavy with cargo, and fishing craft marked by years of salt and sun. Each had its own shape and purpose, yet none of them seemed meant for us. We asked questions of sailors we met along the way. Some pointed farther down the dock. Others shook their heads and spoke of ships already full. The morning passed in this manner, step by step, from pier to pier, until at last we came to a vessel that stood apart from the rest. She was larger than most and darker in color. Her sides bore marks of long use, and her lines suggested strength rather than beauty. From her masts hung the long boats used for hunting whales, and upon her deck lay tools whose purpose was clear even to an untrained eye. "This is the one," Queequeg said quietly. Her name was painted on her stern in worn letters, Pequod. There was something in her appearance that held our attention. She did not look like a ship bound for easy waters. Her timbers seemed shaped for distant seas and heavy work. Even at rest, she carried the air of long journeys yet to come. We stood for a moment in silence, watching the slow movement of the tide against her hull. Around us, the harbor went on with its ordinary business, but the ship before us seemed removed from that activity, as though she belonged already to another world. Soon we noticed a man standing near the gangway. His face was weathered, and one of his legs appeared stiff, as though it were not wholly his own. He leaned upon a crutch and regarded us with a calm and searching look. "Do you wish to ship?" he asked. We answered that we did. He spoke of the voyage in measured words. The ship was bound for distant waters, where whales were known to roam in great numbers. The journey would be long, and the work would be hard. There would be no turning back once the sails were raised. His voice carried neither warning nor promise, only statement. Yet beneath his words lay something unspoken, something that did not belong to the sea alone. He asked about our skills, and Queequeg showed him the long weapon he carried with such care. The man examined it closely, then nodded. "A harpooner is always welcome," he said. As for me, he said little. Perhaps it was enough that I wished to go, or perhaps the ship herself did not require much more. Before we could step aboard, the man paused and looked at us again. "Have you heard of the white whale?" he asked. The question came without emotion, yet it seemed to carry weight. We said that we had heard rumors. He nodded slowly. "Then you know something of this voyage already." With that, he turned away and limped back toward the ship, leaving us standing at the foot of the gangway. We looked at one another in silence. The name of the whale hung between us like a cloud that had not yet taken shape. Neither of us spoke of it, yet both of us felt its presence. Still, the decision had already been made. We stepped onto the deck. The boards creaked beneath our feet, and the ropes swayed gently with the motion of the tide. Around us, men moved quietly, preparing for departure. Barrels were rolled into place, and bundles of tools were secured with care. The smell of tar and salt filled the air. The sea lay just beyond the side of the ship, its surface reflecting the pale light of the sky. Standing there, I felt the final break between land and voyage. The harbor was still close enough to see, yet already distant in meaning. The streets and the inn, the warmth of the fire and the shelter of walls, belonged to another chapter of life. The ship, by contrast, offered no such comfort. She promised only movement, distance, and time measured in days of wind and nights of water. Queequeg stood beside me, calm as ever. His eyes rested upon the sea, not with fear, but with recognition. To him, this world of wood and water was not strange, it was home. Together we walked along the deck, learning its shape and its boundaries. The masts rose high above us, and the sails hung folded, waiting for wind. The long boats rested at their places, silent and still, like creatures asleep. In this quiet moment before departure, the ship seemed to breathe. Her timbers gave small sounds as they settled into the water, and the ropes answered the pull of the tide. It was as though she already knew the course she would take. Thus, without ceremony or farewell, we became part of her. The harbor no longer held us, and the land began to fade into memory even before the anchor was lifted. The journey had not yet begun upon the sea, but it had begun within us. And so ended the first stage of the voyage, the leaving of shore, the finding of a companion, and the choosing of a ship. Beyond this lay only the open water. The deck of the Pequod was busy with quiet preparation. Men moved without haste, yet with purpose, carrying bundles of rope, fastening barrels, and checking the long boats that rested along the ship's sides. Their voices were low, and their steps measured, as though the vessel itself required silence before the voyage began. Queequeg and I stood among them, not yet fully part of the crew, but no longer strangers. The ship seemed to receive us without ceremony. Her boards creaked beneath our weight, and the gentle motion of the water passed into our bodies as a slow, steady rhythm. Below deck, the air was darker and heavier. Lanterns burned with small flames, casting wavering circles of light upon the walls. The smell of oil, tar, and damp wood filled the narrow spaces. Hammocks were already hung in rows, waiting for their occupants. Chests and sea bags lay tucked beneath them, marking the places where each man would rest when the day's work was done. We were led to a small desk near the main mast, where the ship's papers were kept. A man with a serious face sat there, holding a book and a pen. He asked our names and our intended roles. Queequeg showed his harpoon and was marked down as a harpooner. I, having no special weapon to present, was entered simply as a common sailor. Thus, with a few words and the writing of names upon a page, we became part of the voyage. No oath was required, and no speech was made. The sea itself seemed to stand in place of all ceremony. As the morning passed, more men arrived. They came singly or in pairs, carrying their belongings upon their shoulders. Some had faces darkened by sun and wind. Others bore the look of men who had spent too long in cities and now sought open air. A few spoke with foreign accents, and their clothing showed customs not known in the harbor town. Together they formed a company unlike any gathered upon land. Their lives were bound not by birthplace, but by the water toward which they now turned. Among them were men who laughed easily and men who spoke only when required. Some appeared restless, pacing the deck as though eager for motion. Others leaned against the rail, gazing out over the harbor with quiet expressions, as if already thinking of what lay beyond it. It was among these men that the first true rumors of the white whale began to take shape. At first, they were little more than hints, a sentence half spoken, a word quickly withdrawn. Someone would mention a whale of uncommon size, and another would reply with silence rather than agreement. Later, as the hours passed and the crew grew more familiar with one another, the stories became clearer. They spoke of a whale whose body was pale as frost upon the sea, a creature marked by scars from past encounters, as though iron and rope had failed to claim him. Some said he moved with strange purpose, not like other whales who followed the currents, but as if guided by a will of his own. Others added that ships which crossed his path did not return unchanged. Their hulls bore damage, and their crews carried memories that did not fade easily. Yet these stories were never told loudly. They were shared in quiet tones, as if the sound of them might travel across the water. With the whale came another name, spoken with even greater care, the name of the captain. We had not yet seen him. His absence was itself a presence. It shaped the space around us, filling the ship with expectation. Some men said he was already aboard, though he kept to his cabin. Others believed he remained ashore, delayed by illness or by thoughts too heavy to be carried at once to sea. What all agreed upon was that his life had been bound to the white whale. One man told of a meeting long past when ship and whale had crossed paths in violent struggle. Another said only that the captain bore the mark of that encounter upon his body. No one described it fully. They spoke instead of loss and endurance, and then fell silent. In this way, the figure of the captain grew larger without being seen. He became less a man than a shape of purpose, a force directed toward a single point upon the vast map of the sea. As the afternoon wore on, the harbor slowly changed its sound. The cries of birds grew fewer, and the voices of townsfolk faded. Only the creaking of ships and the slap of water against wood remained. From time to time, A man would glance toward the cabin door at the stern, as though expecting it to open, but it did not. Instead, the crew continued their work. Lines were coiled and sails examined. The long boats were lowered slightly and then raised again, tested as if they, too, must be ready for what lay ahead. Queequeg watched these preparations with calm interest. To him, the ship was a familiar world. The weapons, the ropes, the tools of pursuit, these were not strange objects, but parts of a single craft he had long practiced. I, by contrast, felt the growing weight of the voyage more clearly. The words spoken of the whale and of the captain did not yet form a single story, but they gathered like clouds whose shape had not yet been decided. It seemed that the ship was not merely bound for the ordinary business of the sea. She carried with her an unspoken purpose, a direction shaped as much by memory as by map. Thus, before we had left the harbor, the voyage had already begun to take its deeper form. We were no longer only sailors upon a whaling ship. We were companions in a pursuit whose object was still unseen, yet already named, the white whale, and the man who sought him. As the day declined, the ship seemed to settle into herself, as though she were slowly learning the weight of her own company. The sounds of preparation softened into a steady pattern, the sliding of rope, the hollow thud of barrels placed into their holds, and the distant call of men from one end of the deck to the other. These noises did not hurry. They repeated themselves like a slow breathing. Below deck, the lanterns glowed with warmer light as evening approached. Shadows gathered in the corners of the narrow passages, and the hammocks swayed gently with the motion of the tide. The air carried a mixture of smells: oil for the lamps, tar for the seams, and the faint trace of food from the galley. It was a closed world, wooden and dark, shaped to move upon water rather than upon land. Here and there, small groups of sailors spoke in low voices. Their words were not of the harbor they had left behind, but of the sea that waited beyond it. Some talked of past voyages, of storms crossed and ports visited. Others spoke of whales seen at a distance, rising like hills from the water before sinking again into silence. It was in such talk that the white whale took clearer form. One man described him as larger than any living thing he had ever known. Another said his back shone pale against the blue of the sea, as though moonlight had fallen upon him even at midday. A third claimed that iron had struck his flesh and failed to hold, sliding away as though the creature were made not of muscle, but of stone. Yet for all these descriptions, no two were alike. Each voice shaped the whale according to memory or fear. He became not a single animal, but many images gathered into one name. Between these stories moved the figure of the captain, still unseen. Some men spoke of him as one speaks of a great storm remembered long after it has passed. Others referred to him with a kind of quiet respect, as though his name alone carried weight enough to bend a conversation. They said he had once met the white whale face to face upon the open sea. They said the meeting had not been a simple hunt, but a struggle that had changed both ship and man. From that day forward, his life had taken a single direction. No one said plainly what had been lost in that meeting. Yet when they spoke of it, their eyes turned away and their voices grew slower. It was also said that he rarely showed himself to the crew before a voyage. His place was upon the quarterdeck or within his cabin, surrounded by charts and instruments. Some believed he waited for the proper moment to appear, as though timing itself were part of his purpose. As darkness fell, the ship grew quieter, the sounds of the town faded, and the water at the hull spoke more clearly. From above came the soft creak of the masts, and from below the slow shifting of cargo in its place. Queequeg and I found our hammocks and lay down, though neither of us slept at once. The closeness of so many men in one space made the air feel thick with breath and thought. Voices continued to rise and fall, blending with the movement of the ship. From time to time, the name of the whale reached my ears again. Always it came in fragments, white, great, scarred, dangerous, and always it was followed by a pause, as though something more could be said, but was not. I began to feel that this creature was less a part of the sea than a part of the ship itself. His image traveled with us already, though he lay somewhere beyond the horizon. In this way, the voyage seemed to be directed not only by wind and chart, but by a thought shared among the men. At last, sleep came in short intervals. Dreams rose and fell like waves, carrying pieces of the day with them. In one moment, I saw the pale line of a whale's back cutting through water. In another, I heard only the sound of ropes and the low voice of the sea. When morning returned, the harbor was already growing distant in meaning. Though the ship had not yet moved, the crew gathered upon the deck in quiet order. Some ate in silence. Others gazed outward as if measuring the width of the water before them. It was then that a stir passed through the ship. Not a cry nor a command, but a change in attention. Heads turned toward the stern, and voices fell still. A figure had appeared upon the deck above, moving slowly, as though each step were chosen with care. I saw him only from a distance, yet his presence seemed to fill the space between masts and rails. He leaned upon a long staff, and his posture suggested both strength and injury. The wind moved his coat gently, and the light touched his face without revealing it fully. No one spoke his name aloud. It was not needed. The captain had come among us. He did not address the crew at once. Instead, he stood for a moment, looking out across the water beyond the harbor. His gaze did not rest upon the town or upon the men before him, but upon the open sea itself. In that silence, the many stories seemed to draw together. The whale, the rumors, the long preparation all appeared to point toward this single figure and the direction of his eyes. Though he said nothing, it was as if a course had already been set. And so, before the anchor was raised, before the sails were spread, the true nature of the voyage began to take shape, not as a journey for profit alone, nor as a common hunt, but as a pursuit guided by memory, will, and the pale image of something waiting far beyond the reach of land. The figure upon the quarterdeck remained still for a long moment. The sea lay before him like an open page, and the wind touched his coat without stirring it greatly. Though he did not yet speak, his presence altered the tone of the ship. The murmurs of the crew faded into silence, and the many separate thoughts of the men seemed to draw together into a single line of attention. At last he turned toward us. His face was marked by years of wind and salt, and by something deeper than either. One of his legs appeared stiff and unlike the other, as though part of him had been shaped not by nature, but by necessity. He leaned upon his staff, yet the way he stood suggested no weakness, only a careful measure of strength. When he spoke, his voice was low and even. It carried across the deck without effort. He did not begin with greetings. He did not ask who we were or where we had come from. Instead, he spoke of the voyage. We were bound, he said, for distant seas where whales were known to roam. The ship had been prepared for a long journey, and the crew chosen for endurance rather than comfort. Each man aboard would have his share in what was taken from the sea. These words alone would have been nothing unusual. Many ships sailed with the same purpose, yet beneath them lay another meaning, one that soon rose to the surface. He spoke then of a whale unlike the others, a creature of immense size and pale color, whose back showed above the water like a drifting island, a being that had crossed the paths of ships and left its mark upon them, a whale whose movements were remembered not for their grace, but for their force. As he described this whale, his voice did not change. It remained calm, almost distant, yet there was a firmness beneath it, as though each word had been chosen long before it was spoken. He did not name the creature at first. He spoke of it only as one might speak of a storm remembered from childhood, or of a mountain seen once and never forgotten. Then, after a pause, he gave it its name, the white whale. At that name, a slight movement passed through the crew. Some shifted their weight, others lowered their eyes. A few looked out toward the sea as if expecting to see something rise from it. The captain continued. He said that this whale had crossed his path before. He did not tell us how, nor where, nor with what result, only that the meeting had not ended as other hunts do. From that day forward, the image of the whale had remained with him, as clear as any chart. Now, he said, the ship would follow that image. The voyage would not be shaped only by chance encounters upon the sea. It would be guided by the memory of that meeting and by the course that memory now demanded. There was no anger in his voice and no excitement. What he spoke carried the tone of decision rather than desire. It was as though the path had already been laid out before him, and he merely walked upon it. He told us that any man who wished only for an ordinary voyage might still turn back. The harbor lay behind us. The land was close. The anchor had not yet been lifted. But any man who chose to remain would take part in this pursuit, not simply of whales in general, but of one whale in particular. The sea, he said, was wide and full of creatures, yet among them was one that drew all others into shadow. To seek it was not merely to hunt, but to follow a question written upon the water. For a moment, no one moved. The sound of the wind in the rigging seemed louder than before. The water touched the hull in slow, steady beats. The harbor lay visible beyond the rail, quiet and unchanged. Then one man stepped forward. He did not speak, but his movement was answer enough. Others followed, one by one, until the deck was again filled with bodies standing in place. No voice rose in protest. No cheer was given in return. The decision passed among us without sound. The captain looked upon us once more, then turned away. His staff struck the deck softly as he moved, and the space he left behind seemed fuller for his absence. From that moment, the ship took on a different meaning. She was no longer merely a vessel for trade or labor. She became a line drawn upon the sea, pointing toward a single purpose. The ropes, the sails, the long boats at her sides all were shaped now for that direction. Queequeg stood beside me, his face calm as ever. To him, the whale was not an idea, but a being, one whose life followed paths known only to the water. He did not fear it, nor did he seek it with thought. He accepted its place in the voyage as he accepted the wind and the tide. As for me, I felt the weight of the decision more slowly. The rumors that had drifted through the ship now took form as intention. The many fragments of story joined into a single course. The white whale was no longer a name whispered in corners. It was the center toward which the ship would move. The harbor seemed farther away than before, though it had not changed its distance. The town lay quiet, its roofs and streets fixed in their places. But the meaning of those things had begun to fade. The sea, by contrast, had grown deeper, not in measure, but in thought. It appeared no longer as a wide and empty field, but as a place shaped by memory and will. Its surface had not only creatures of flesh, but images carried in the minds of men. And among those images, one stood pale and unmoving, the white whale. Thus, before the sails were spread and before the anchor left the ground, the true voyage was already underway. We were not merely bound for distant waters. We were bound toward a single shadow upon the sea. The day of departure came without ceremony. The harbor was still wrapped in pale light when the final ropes were loosened, and the anchor lifted from the ground where it had rested. The town did not wave farewell, and no music marked the moment. only the slow turning of the tide, and the soft creaking of the ship announced that motion had begun. At first, the land seemed to remain beside us, moving no faster than we did. The warehouses and low houses along the shore slid past in silence. Then, little by little, they grew smaller, until they became shapes rather than places. The water widened before the bow, and the sky appeared to lift itself higher above us. The sails were spread, one by one. Canvas caught the wind with a quiet breath, and the ship answered by leaning slightly into her course. The harbor slipped behind us, and with it the last signs of streets and walls. What remained was the open water, marked only by distant vessels, and the faint line of the horizon. Life aboard the ship soon took on its steady form. Each man learned his place among ropes and masts. Watches were set, and the day was divided into small portions of work and rest. Some stood upon the deck, keeping their eyes upon the water ahead. Others climbed into the rigging, their movements slow and practiced, as though guided by memory rather than thought. Queequeg took his place among the harpooners. He handled his weapon with the same care he had shown at the inn, treating it not as a tool of violence, but as an object shaped by long use and belief. When he stood at the rail and looked out upon the sea, his face held neither impatience nor fear, but a calm recognition of the road before us. I was given simpler tasks. I learned to coil ropes in the manner required aboard a whaling ship and to move with the rhythm of the deck beneath my feet. At first, every step required attention. The ship's motion was gentle, yet constant, and the body had to learn a new balance, one shaped by water rather than by stone. Meals were taken in the narrow space below deck. The light there was dim, and the air heavy with the smell of wood and oil. Men sat close together, their bowls held in their hands. Conversation was brief and often broken by the sound of spoons against metal or by the creak of the ship's timbers. Food at sea carried no ceremony. It was taken as part of the day's work, no more and no less. Yet in these simple meals, a quiet order appeared. Each man knew where he belonged, and the ship itself seemed to listen to the rhythm of eating and resting as it listened to the wind. When night came, the deck changed its character, the sky darkened, and the line between sea and air grew thin. Stars appeared slowly, one by one, until the space above us was filled with distant lights. The ship moved through this darkness as through a second ocean, her sails faintly visible against the night. Those on watch walked back and forth along the deck, their steps measured and slow. The sound of the water against the hull grew clearer, and the wind spoke more distinctly in the rigging. All other noises seemed small by comparison. Queequeg and I often stood together during these hours. He spoke little, but when he did, his words were shaped by thoughts not often heard among sailors. He spoke of the sea as a living path, one that carried both men and creatures without choosing between them. To him, whales were not merely objects of pursuit, but travelers like ourselves following courses known only to the water. Listening to him, I began to see the ocean less as an empty field and more as a place filled with hidden lines of movement. Beneath the surface, unseen lives crossed and turned, rising at times into view, then sinking again into silence. During the day, the sea appeared wide and calm. Waves rose and fell in slow patterns, and the horizon seemed fixed in place, though the ship moved steadily toward it. From time to time, a distant spout was seen, white against the blue of the water. The cry of "there she blows" would pass along the deck, yet no chase followed. These were not the creatures we sought. In such moments, the crew gathered at the rail, their eyes trained upon the moving water. Each man carried his own thought of what might one day rise before us. For some, it was only the promise of labor and reward. For others, it was the shape of the white whale, though his name was not spoken. Between work and watch, the hours passed without clear division. The sun marked time more than any clock. Morning brought a pale light that touched the sails, and evening colored the sea. With long shadows, the ship moved through these changes as through a single, unbroken motion. At times, the wind fell quiet, and the sails hung loose. The ship drifted with the slow movement of the water, in such stillness. Even small sounds grew large, the splash of a wave against the hull, the call of a bird far above, the low voice of a man speaking from one end of the deck to the other. It was during one such calm that Queequeg and I sat together near the bow. The sea lay smooth before us, and the ship's motion was hardly felt. He told me then of his home, of distant shores and customs unlike those of the harbor we had left behind. His words were simple, yet they carried a sense of long journeys already taken to him. The voyage before us was not the first step into the unknown, but another turn upon a road already begun. I listened, and in his stories I heard a different meaning of travel. It was not only a matter of leaving one place for another, but of moving within a larger path that did not belong to land alone. As night returned and the watch was called, we rose and took our places once more. The stars had shifted, and the wind spoke again in the sails. The ship moved on, carrying us farther from shore and deeper into the wide and waiting sea. Thus passed the first days of the voyage, not with great events, nor with sudden change, but with the slow shaping of life upon the water. Work, rest, light, and darkness followed one another, in quiet order, and the ship learned the weight and movement of her company. The land had faded from sight, the sea remained. With each passing day, the rhythm of the ship became more deeply fixed within us. The hours no longer seemed separate, but joined together by the slow movement of the sea. Morning did not arrive suddenly, nor did night fall at once. Light faded and returned as gently as breath. The watches divided our time. One group of men rested while another stood upon the deck, their eyes trained upon the water ahead. When the bell sounded, places were exchanged without haste. The same footsteps passed again and again along the same narrow paths, and the sound of boots upon wood grew as familiar as the sound of waves. Standing watch in the early hours, I learned to listen not only with my ears, but with my whole body. The wind spoke first, touching the sails with long, steady hands. Then the water answered, striking the hull in small, repeated motions. Above, the masts gave out a low sound, like distant trees moving together in a forest. There were moments when the ship seemed almost still. The horizon lay flat and unbroken, and the sky and sea met without clear boundary. In such hours, the mind wandered easily. Thoughts rose and fell like the water beneath our feet, carrying fragments of memory and images of places already left behind. Work returned with the light. Ropes were checked, sails adjusted, and tools examined. The long boats were inspected as though they were living things that must be kept ready for sudden use. Each man knew his task, and the repetition of these tasks gave the day its shape. Meals followed this order. They came not as moments of rest alone, but as part of the ship's movement through time. The same bowls, the same narrow benches, the same low ceiling received us again and again. Words were few. The sound of eating blended with the sound of water and wood, until all seemed part of a single motion. Queequeg remained close to me in these days, though his work lay with the harpoon and the boats. He often joined me during quieter hours. He moved with a calm that did not belong to the ship alone, but to something carried within him. In the evenings, when the sun fell low and the sea darkened, we would sit near the rail and watch the long path of light fade upon the water. It was then that he spoke more freely of his thoughts. He told me that the ocean was not empty, even when it appeared so. Beneath the surface, he said, ran many paths, crossed by creatures and spirits alike. The whale followed one such path, and the ship followed another. Where the two might meet was known only to the water itself. To him, the hunt was not merely a struggle between man and beast. It was a meeting of travelers, each moving according to laws older than any written upon land. The harpoon, he said, was only one part of that meeting, and not always the most important. Listening to him, I felt the distance between land and sea grow greater. The world of streets and walls seemed narrow compared to this wide, moving field. Here, nothing remained fixed except the horizon, and even that shifted with each hour. Night watches brought a deeper quiet. The crew's voices faded, and the ship's own sounds became more clear. The stars shone with a cold light, and the sails appeared pale against the darkness. Walking back and forth along the deck, I felt the ship's motion pass through my feet and into my body. Each step carried the same measure, and each turn brought the same view: water, sky, and the long shadow of the mast. Sometimes a distant spout appeared. White against the night, it rose and fell without sound, leaving only a faint trace upon the surface. The men would pause to watch it, then return to their walk. These were not yet the creatures we sought. Between such moments, time seemed to stretch. The sea offered no change of scene, and the mind learned to dwell upon small details: the shape of a cloud, the line of foam beside the hull, the way the wind pressed against the sail. Queequeg once told me that a man at sea must learn to see without looking too hard. The water, he said, would show what it wished to show when it wished to show it. To force the eyes was to miss what lay quietly before them. Thus we learned to wait. The ship moved steadily onward, day after day, night after night. The harbor had long vanished, and the land existed only as a thought. What remained was the slow teaching of the voyage itself. In this way, the sea did not announce itself as a single great power. It revealed itself through repetition, through the rising and falling of waves, through the turning of watches, through the steady breathing of wind in the sails. Life aboard the Pequod became not an event, but a condition. We were no longer travelers passing through the water. We were part of its motion, carried forward by a force that did not need to be named, and beneath this calm order, something waited. The white whale had not yet appeared. His image remained only in the minds of men and in the quiet stories shared at night. Yet his presence seemed to move with us, as though the sea itself were guiding both ship and thought toward a single meeting. So passed the days and nights upon the deck, not in sudden change, but in slow, continuous motion, like the turning of the earth beneath the stars. As the voyage continued, the days lost their sharp edges. Morning and evening no longer stood apart as distinct moments, but blended into one another like colors upon the surface of the sea. The bell marked the hours, yet even its sound seemed softer, as though the ship herself wished to keep time without calling attention to it. Work and rest exchanged places so often that the body ceased to measure them. A man would lie in his hammock while the ship moved beneath him, then rise again to walk the deck as though he had never been still. Sleep came in fragments, carried by the slow rocking of the hull, and dreams borrowed their motion from the waves. I found that I no longer thought of the voyage as something that would end. It had become a condition of being, like breath or tide. The land belonged to another memory, one that grew fainter each time the sun set and rose again over open water. Queequeg's presence was a steady point within this motion. He spoke little of himself, yet in his silence there was comfort. We shared our food, our watch, and the narrow space of the deck without need of constant speech. In this closeness, words were no longer required to confirm friendship. It showed itself in small actions, in the passing of a bowl, in the turning of a shoulder to make room, in the shared gaze upon the horizon. One afternoon, when the sea lay flat and the wind had fallen, we sat together near the bow. The water ahead was smooth as glass, broken only by the slow line of the ship's own path. No birds followed us, and no sails marked the distance. Queequeg told me then that among his people, a voyage was not counted by miles, but by changes of the soul. A man who returned from the sea was not the same man who had left it, even if his body remained unchanged. The water, he said, washed not only the skin, but the thoughts. I considered this as I watched the ship's shadow drift beneath us. The idea seemed true. Already, the concerns of the shore felt thin and distant. Here, each hour was shaped by the same elements, wind, wave, and the quiet labor of men. There was little room for the small troubles of land. Even fear appeared differently upon the water. It did not arrive as a sudden shock, but as a low presence, moving alongside thought. The rumors of the white whale still lingered, yet they no longer pressed upon the mind with the same force. They had become part of the voyage's air, as common as the smell of salt. At night, the watches continued their slow path. The stars shifted in their places, and the moon drew a pale road across the sea. The ship followed that road for a time, then left it behind and found another. There were hours when nothing changed at all. The wind held steady, the sails did not move, and the water rose and fell in the same pattern again and again. In such stillness, even thought grew quiet. The mind learned to rest upon the same scene without seeking difference. It was during one of these nights that Queequeg and I stood together beneath the mast, watching the faint glow of the sky where it met the water. He spoke of whales not as prey, but as elders of the sea, beings who had learned its depths long before men built ships. He said that when a whale rose to breathe, it did not break the surface, but joined it, as though sea and body were of one substance. To strike such a creature, he believed, was to strike a living part of the ocean itself. I listened without answering. His words did not argue with the purpose of the voyage, yet they changed the way I held it in my mind. The hunt seemed no longer a simple matter of pursuit and capture, but a meeting between different kinds of travelers, each moving according to laws not fully known to the other. Thus, even as the ship carried tools of iron and rope, it also carried questions. The days went on, the sun marked its path, and the bell marked the watches. The crew moved through their tasks with a quiet certainty. No storms came, and no great events disturbed the order of the ship. The sea remained wide and calm, offering only its surface and its sound. In this long sameness, the voyage found its true shape. It was not the chase alone that defined it, nor the stories whispered of the white whale. It was the life that unfolded between those moments, the rising and setting of light, the sharing of space, the steady breathing of the sails. Queequeg and I grew used to one another's presence as men grow used to the sound of water beside them. His silence became as familiar as speech, and his way of seeing the sea entered slowly into my own. I no longer thought of him as a stranger from a distant shore. He was simply my companion upon the water, bound to the same movement and the same waiting. And so the voyage continued, not as a road with a clear end, but as a circle drawn upon the sea. The ship moved forward, yet each day resembled the one before it. In this repetition, something deeper than motion took place. The men were being shaped by the water they crossed. The white whale remained unseen. Yet his shadow lay quietly over these days and nights, not as fear, but as direction. He was not yet a form upon the surface, but a presence within the purpose of the ship. Thus ended the early life of the voyage, not with great signs or sudden change, but with the slow settling of men into the Rhythm of the sea. Before a man can truly understand the hunt, he must first understand the creature that is hunted. The whale is not a fish, though it moves like one. It is not a beast of the land, though it breathes as we do. It belongs to a world between these forms, shaped by water, yet bound to air. Among the creatures of the sea, the whale stands apart in size and nature. Its body is built for long journeys beneath the surface, yet it must return again and again to the light above. In this way, it is both hidden and revealed, passing from depth to sky in slow and measured rhythm. There are many kinds of whales, though they are often spoken of as one. Some are small when compared with others, no larger than a modest boat. Some are vast, their backs rising from the water, like islands that drift and disappear. Their shapes differ, their movements vary, and their voices, carried through water, belong to forms of sound unknown to men upon land. One may divide whales into families, as scholars divide all living things. There are those whose mouths are armed with long rows of teeth, shaped for grasping and tearing. There are others whose mouths contain wide plates instead, made not for biting, but for straining small creatures from the sea. These two great divisions mark the whale world, separating hunters from gatherers in the vast field of water. The toothed whales move with sudden strength. Their heads are narrow, and their bodies shaped for speed. They rise and fall quickly, cutting the surface with sharp lines. Their eyes appear small, yet their sense of direction is guided by sounds that travel through water rather than air. The whales with plates instead of teeth move more slowly, their mouths open wide, and the sea itself passes through them. They take into their bodies countless small lives and release the water again, keeping only what they need. Their size is often greater than that of the toothed whales, and their movements are marked by long, gentle curves. Among these great divisions stand many species, each with its own form and habit. Some are known by the length of their heads, others by the shape of their fins. Some are marked by folds along their throats, others by the smoothness of their skin. Names have been given to them by sailors and scholars alike, though the sea itself knows no such divisions. The largest of these creatures may measure many times the length of a man. When such a whale rises, the water slides from its back in shining sheets. The eye of the whale, small in proportion to its body, looks out from a vast field of flesh. Its tail, broad and powerful, moves with slow certainty, sending waves outward as it strikes the water. Yet even the smallest whale carries within it a form of life unknown upon land. Its heart beats deep within its body, and its blood travels through paths shaped for cold and pressure. Its lungs hold great stores of air, allowing it to remain below the surface longer than any human breath could endure. The skin of the whale is thick and smooth, darkened by water and time. Beneath it lies a layer of fat, stored as both warmth and strength. This substance, taken from the whale by men, has been used for light and for many purposes upon land. Yet within the creature itself, it serves only to guard life against the cold of the deep. The whale's bones are heavy, yet they float. Their structure is such that the body remains balanced between sinking and rising. In this balance, the whale finds its path through the sea, neither bound to the surface nor lost to the depths. Its movement is not like that of a fish, which turns with quick motions of the tail. The whale moves its body as one great form, bending slowly, sending power backward along its length. The water answers this movement, and the whale advances without haste. From time to time, the whale must rise to breathe. When it does so, it lifts part of its body above the surface and releases air from its lungs. This breath appears as a white cloud against the sky. Sailors have long used this sign to know where whales travel, for the breath of the whale is its only visible speech. This breath does not pass through the mouth, as in land creatures. It rises instead from an opening upon the head, shaped for this purpose alone. In this design, the whale shows how its form belongs fully to the sea, even in the act that binds it to air. The name whale has been given to many creatures that differ greatly from one another. Some that are called whales are closer in form to dolphins, and some are closer to beasts of the deep. The word itself does not describe one shape, but a family of lives that share only their path, through water and air. Sailors have named whales by their colors, their habits, and the places where they are seen. They speak of black whales and right whales, of gray-headed whales and swift-moving whales. These names do not belong to books alone, but to memory and to labor. To the men who hunt them, whales are known not only by form, but by behavior. Some flee when approached, others turn suddenly, as though aware of pursuit. A few appear to follow ships, for long distances, rising and falling beside them like silent companions. In the wide ocean, the whale is both solitary and part of a greater order. It may travel alone for long stretches, yet it also joins others of its kind when the season calls them together. These gatherings are hidden from human sight, taking place in depths beyond reach, guided by signs not written upon charts. Thus, the whale lives in a world layered within our own. Its paths cross ours only at moments. When breath meets air and back meets light, the rest of its life belongs to water and darkness, to pressure and sound, to movements slow and unseen. To speak of the whale, then, is not to speak of a single creature, but of a vast company shaped by the sea. Their forms differ, their voices differ, their courses differ, yet they are united by a single law, that of the deep, where time is measured not by clocks, but by tides. Before the hunt can be understood, this must be known. The whale is not merely a target upon the surface. It is a being whose life stretches far beyond what the eye can see. Its size, its breath, its slow rising and sinking all belong to a rhythm older than any ship. And so, when the ship follows the whale, it follows not only a body of flesh, but a path written upon the water by countless lives before it. To understand the whale more fully, one must turn from its movement to its form. The body of the whale is not shaped by land, but by water alone. Every part of it answers to the pressure of the deep and the long distance of its paths. The head of the whale is vast when compared with the rest of its body. In some kinds, it makes up nearly a third of the whole. This great mass contains not only the mouth and the brain, but wide chambers of air and oil that help to balance the creature as it moves through the sea. The mouth opens not at the front of the head, as in most beasts, but beneath it. In this way, the whale takes the sea into itself, drawing in water and the small lives carried within it. For those whales that possess teeth, the mouth is armed with long and even rows. For those without teeth, wide plates hang from the upper jaw, forming a curtain through which the water passes. The eye of the whale is set far back upon the head. It looks outward from a field of flesh, not forward as in many creatures of the land. Its sight does not guide it alone. Sound travels through the sea more clearly than light, and the whale follows these hidden lines of hearing more than the shapes before its eyes. The skull of the whale is thick and heavy, yet shaped in such a way that it does not sink the creature. Large cavities within the bone hold oil and air. These spaces lighten the head and allow it to rise easily to the surface when breath is needed. Behind the head runs the long spine of the whale. It is made of many joints, each fitted to the necks in a slow curve. The spine is the road along which power travels from the great muscles of the body to the broad tail. When the whale moves, it bends not sharply, but in long waves of motion, sending strength backward through its frame. The ribs of the whale form a wide cage round its heart and lungs. These organs lie deep within, protected by layers of muscle and fat. The lungs are great in size, allowing the whale to hold within itself a store of air far greater than that of any land creature. With this air, it descends into the depths and remains there while the surface world passes above it unseen. The heart of the whale beats slowly. It moves blood through vessels shaped for cold and pressure. The life within the whale is carried not by speed, but by endurance. Its body is built not for sudden motion alone, but for long hours beneath the surface, where light does not reach. The skin of the whale is smooth and firm. It bears few marks of hair or covering, for such things belong to creatures of the air. Water passes easily along the surface, and the body glides without resistance. Beneath the skin lies a thick layer of fat, known to sailors as blubber. This layer serves many purposes. It holds warmth within the whale, guarding it against the cold of deep water. It stores strength, drawn from the food of the sea, and it shapes the body into a single flowing form, softening the lines of bone and muscle beneath. To men upon land, this blubber has long been of value. From it comes oil, which has been used for light, for heat, and for many works of human craft. Yet within the whale, it is only part of life itself, neither tool nor treasure, but flesh shaped for the sea. The muscles of the whale lie in long bands along its sides and back. They do not pull the body upward or downward, as in land creatures, but backward and forward, sending the tail against the water. In slow, powerful strokes, the tail, broad and flat, moves not side to side, but up and down, driving the whale onward with each measured motion. Within the body, the organs are arranged not as in beasts of the field, but according to the needs of diving and rising. The stomach holds the food gathered from the sea, often in great quantity. The liver and other inner parts lie protected behind bone and fat, working in silence while the whale travels. There are no limbs shaped for walking. The whale's arms have become fins, small in proportion to its body, used not for pushing against the water, but for guiding its course. They turn the great form gently to one side or the other, keeping balance as the tail provides motion. The bones of the whale are not hollow like those of birds, nor solid like those of many beasts. They are heavy, yet filled with oil and marrow. In this way, the whale is neither bound to sink nor forced to float. It rests between the two, finding its place in the water by the shape of its own body. When the whale rises to breathe, the movement begins deep within its frame. The spine bends, the muscles tighten, and the head lifts slowly. The surface of the sea parts, and the opening upon the head releases a cloud of air. This breath is warm from within the body and cold in the outer air, and so it appears as a pale mist above the water. After this breath, the whale sinks again, carrying light and air with it for a time, until both are spent. Then it rises once more, following the same slow path between worlds. Thus, the body of the whale is not a single thing, but many things joined into one form. Bone, muscle, fat, air, and blood all serve the same purpose, to move through water with calm strength, and to remain there longer than any human body could endure. Its size is not mere weight. It is space shaped by life. Within it lie chambers of air and stores of warmth, paths of blood and roads of bone. All these work together without sound, without pause, carrying the creature through its long courses beneath the sea. To look upon the whale from the deck of a ship is to see only a small part of this form. A back rising and falling, a tail striking the water, a breath sent into the sky. The greater part of its life remains hidden below, moving through darkness and pressure in steady rhythm. So, when men speak of the whale, they often speak only of what appears above the surface. Yet the true whale is found beneath, in the long body shaped by the deep and in the silent work of its inner parts. This is the creature the ship follows, not merely a shadow upon the water, but a vast living form whose paths lie far below the reach of sight. And before the hunt is taken up again, this body must be known, not as an enemy, not as a prize, but as a life shaped entirely by the sea. Before the chase can be understood, the labor that surrounds it must be known. Whaling is not a single act, but a long chain of work, beginning upon land and ending far out upon the open water. It is shaped by seasons, by tools, and by the steady movement of ships that travel where few other vessels go. From ancient times, men have followed the whale. At first, they did so in small boats, near the shore, watching the paths of the creatures as they rose and fell close to land. These early hunts were brief and dangerous, yet they taught men how to read the signs of the sea, the breath upon the surface, the dark line of a back beneath the water, the sudden stillness that often came before a dive. As knowledge grew, ships were built to travel farther, their hulls were strengthened, and their holds were shaped to carry the great weight taken from the sea. Thus began the long voyages that crossed wide oceans in search of whales that no shore could hold. The tools of whaling were simple in form, yet heavy with purpose. The harpoon was shaped as a long iron point, fixed to a wooden shaft and tied to a rope. This rope led back to the boat, and from the boat to the ship. In this way, a single strike joined whale, boat, and vessel into one line of motion. The lance followed the harpoon. It was thinner and longer, meant not to hold, but to reach deep into the body of the whale. Its task was not to catch, but to end the struggle once the animal had been secured. Ropes were coiled in great heaps upon the deck. Each coil was arranged with care, for a rope that tangled could bring sudden danger. Barrels were prepared to hold oil. Knives were kept sharp. Blocks and pulleys were fixed in place along the sides of the ship. All these things waited in stillness while the sea appeared calm. They seemed lifeless until the moment of use, when they would move together as parts of a single act. The ship itself was shaped for this work. Her sides were built strong enough to bear the weight of the whale when it was drawn close. Her deck was wide, to give space for men and tools. Her hold was deep, to receive the blubber once it had been cut away. Within her, fire would later be kindled in iron pots. Into these pots, the blubber would be placed and slowly melted. The oil that rose from it would be drawn off and stored in barrels. Smoke from this work would drift across the sea, marking the ship's path with a thin dark line. Thus, the whale was not taken only as flesh, but as substance. From it came light for lamps, grease for machines, and material for many crafts. The bones were shaped into tools and ornaments. Even the smallest part was given some use upon land. Yet at sea, this work did not appear as commerce. It appeared as labor repeated day after day. Men watched the water. Boats were lowered and raised again. Tools were handled and set back in place. Often, nothing was taken, and the sea returned only its surface and its sound. In such hours, the ship seemed to drift between effort and waiting. The tools lay ready, but unmoving. The ropes were quiet. The barrels were empty. Only the sails and the waves showed that motion had not ceased. When a whale was sighted, the stillness broke. The cry passed from mouth to mouth, and men ran to their places. Boats were lowered into the water, and oars were set into their locks. The harpooner stood in the bow, his weapon balanced in his hands. The ship slowed, turning slightly to keep the whale in view. From the deck, the scene was silent but full of meaning. The boats became small shapes upon the wide water, moving toward a darker form that rose and sank before them. Between these two shapes lay the purpose of the voyage. Once the whale was struck and secured, the ship returned to its work of receiving. The great body was drawn alongside, and the long cutting began. Men stood upon the deck and upon the whale itself, slicing away strips of blubber and lifting them by ropes and pulleys. This work lasted for many hours, sometimes for days. The sea round the ship changed color, and the air grew heavy with the smell of oil. Smoke rose from the pots, and the sound of cutting filled the space where silence had been before. Yet even this labor was carried out with a kind of order. Each man knew his task. The movements were slow and careful, guided by habit rather than haste. The whale, once a living traveler of the deep, became a source of light and warmth for distant places. When the work was finished, the tools were cleaned and returned to their places. The deck was washed with seawater, and the ship resumed her course. The sea closed again over the path that had been opened. Thus passed the days of whaling, long stretches of waiting, followed by short times of great effort. The ocean gave no sign of when it would offer another meeting. It kept its creatures hidden until the moment of rising. To those who followed this work, the whale was not only a beast of the sea, but a part of a greater system. It linked the deep water to the distant shore, the movement of tides to the light of lamps, the silent paths beneath the surface to the streets of cities far away. In this way, whaling was not only a hunt, but a bridge between worlds, between the water and the land, between darkness and light, between the long patience of the sea and the short needs of men. And upon this bridge moved the ship, carrying both tools and purpose across the wide and waiting ocean. When a man lives long upon the sea, his thoughts begin to change their shape. The land teaches him to measure life by walls and roads, by hours marked upon clocks, and by seasons marked upon fields. The sea teaches him something else. It teaches him to measure by distance and by waiting, by the slow movement of light across water, and by the long silence between events. Upon land, a man may hide himself among buildings and crowds. At sea, he stands exposed between sky and water. There is no place to turn where the horizon does not follow him. In this openness, the mind learns to look inward as often as it looks outward. The ocean appears empty, yet it is never truly so. Beneath its surface, countless lives move without leaving marks. Paths are crossed and uncrossed. Meetings occur and vanish, all without sign upon the water above. To watch the sea is to watch a surface that conceals more than it reveals. This hidden depth shapes the thoughts of those who travel upon it. A sailor learns that what he sees is never the whole of what exists. The line of the horizon seems fixed, yet it shifts with each movement of the ship. The sky seems distant, yet it presses down upon the water with constant presence. In such a world, the idea of fate grows quietly. A man may choose his course upon a map, but the wind chooses whether he will follow it. He may plan his labor, but the sea decides when that labor will be used. Thus, intention and chance move together, neither fully ruling the other. This meeting of will and water gives birth to a strange sense of destiny. Events do not appear sudden. They seem prepared by long silence. A storm is not only a burst of wind, but the end of many still hours. A sighting of a whale is not only a moment of action, but the answer to days of watching. In this way, the sea teaches patience not as a virtue, but as a necessity. To resist it is to exhaust oneself against a force that does not change its pace. Among the crew of the ship, each man carries his own thoughts into this wide field. Some see in the sea only work and reward, others see danger. A few see something greater than either, a mirror of their own minds. To look upon the water is to see movement without clear purpose. Waves rise and fall without end, and no single wave remains. Yet the sea itself remains, holding all these motions within it. So to the mind holds many thoughts, each passing away, while something deeper remains unchanged. It is here that the figure of the captain takes on a different meaning. He does not stand merely as a leader of men, but as a shape of intention set against the vastness of the sea. Where the ocean moves without desire, he moves with a single thought. Where the water follows no memory, he follows one alone, to the crew. This appears as command. To the sea, it appears as another current, narrow but strong. The white whale, in this light, is not only a creature of flesh. It becomes a form upon which thought itself rests. It gathers into one image the fear, the wonder, and the resistance that the sea offers to human will. Some men fear the whale because it is large, others because it is strong. But there are those who fear it because it seems to stand outside the ordinary order of things. It does not flee as other whales flee. It does not move as other creatures move. It appears to act with a purpose not easily named. To such a mind as the captain's, this difference cannot remain only a fact. It becomes a question. Why should one creature resist all others? Why should one form bear so many marks of struggle and yet remain? Why should chance appear as pattern? These questions do not belong to the sea alone. They belong to every man who looks upon it long enough. The ocean does not answer them in words. It answers only with movement. Thus, the pursuit of the whale becomes more than a hunt. It becomes an attempt to place meaning where there may be none, to strike at what seems to hide behind the visible world. The captain does not speak of this openly, yet his course reveals it. His eyes are fixed not upon the water as it is, but upon what he believes it conceals. To follow him is to follow not only a ship, but an idea. For the ordinary sailor, this idea may remain distant. He thinks of pay and of work, of the weight of rope in his hands, and the sound of the bell marking the watch. But even he feels the pull of something deeper when the sea grows too quiet or when the night stretches without change. In such moments, loneliness rises. Not the loneliness of being alone among men, but the loneliness of being small beneath sky and water. The stars appear far away, and the ship seems like a narrow line between two infinities. The mind, faced with such space, turns inward by necessity. Some men fill this inward space with memory, others with prayer, some with silence. The captain fills it with purpose. His will stands against the openness of the sea as a mast stands against the wind. It does not stop the wind, but it gives it form. Through this will, the voyage takes on a single direction, even while the water itself moves in countless ways. Thus, the ship becomes a meeting place of different thoughts, of men who see the sea as labor, of men who see it as mystery, of a captain who sees it as a path toward one image alone. Between these thoughts lies the true life of the voyage, not in the chase yet to come, but in the long movement toward it. The ocean accepts all of this without change. It does not answer belief with belief, nor fear with fear. It carries the ship as it carries driftwood and clouds, without knowing their meaning. Yet to the men upon the deck, meaning grows with each mile. They begin to feel that they are not merely crossing water, but approaching something shaped by thought as much as by distance. The white whale becomes less a creature and more a direction. The sea becomes less a surface and more a field of signs. And in this quiet transformation, the voyage passes from labor into meditation. The waves repeat their motion, the sails hold their wind, the stars return to their places. So do the thoughts of men repeat themselves, turning again and again around the same questions. What is sought? What resists? What remains when both meet? These questions drift through the ship like the sound of water along the hull, not loud enough to command attention, but constant enough to shape the night. Thus, before storm or sighting, before chase or struggle, the true journey takes place within the mind. The ship moves across the sea, the crew moves through time, and thought moves through both, seeking shape in the wide silence of the ocean. There comes a time in every long voyage when the sea appears to offer more than distance. It seems to offer meaning. The water still moves as it always has. Yet the mind begins to place signs upon its surface, as though each wave carried a message meant to be read. Some men believe that all paths are written before they are walked. They look upon the sky and the tide and say that what happens must happen to them. The sea is a great book already completed, and the ship merely turns its pages. Others believe that will alone shapes the course. They look upon the same water and say that it is only matter in motion, waiting for the hand that guides it. To them, the sea is a blank field, and the ship writes its story upon it. Between these two thoughts lies the daily life of the voyage. The wind does not ask what the captain intends. It blows as it will. Yet the sails are set according to his command. The current does not change its direction for human purpose. Yet the rudder turns against it, seeking another line across the water. Thus, every mile is a meeting of force and choice. It is in this meeting that the captain's mind is most clearly shaped. To him, the sea is not only space, it is resistance. It is a surface that hides something behind it, something that cannot be reached by ordinary sight or speech. The whale becomes the form of that hidden thing, rising at times into view, then sinking again beyond reach. He does not speak of chance. He speaks as though the encounter has already occurred, though it lies still ahead. In his thought, the past and the future meet in a single image, the white whale. To pursue such an image is not the same as to follow a creature. It is to follow a memory forward in time, to walk a path drawn by what has already been seen and suffered. In this way, the captain's will does not oppose fate, it joins it. What others might call accident, he calls necessity. What others might see as wandering, he sees as direction. The ocean appears to him not as an open field, but as a road already traced by one line alone. For the crew, this line is less clear. They feel the movement of the ship, the labor of their hands, the passing of days. The greater purpose remains distant, like a star seen through cloud. Yet even they begin to sense that the voyage is not shaped only by trade or by season. There is a stillness in the air when the name of the whale is spoken. A pause follows it, as though thought itself must step aside. In that pause, each man places his own meaning. One thinks of danger, another thinks of reward, another thinks of nothing at all, letting the word pass like wind. But for the captain, the word does not pass. It gathers into itself the whole weight of the sea's refusal to be understood. The whale becomes the visible face of what cannot be questioned in any other way. Why should a creature of the deep rise against iron and wood? Why should a body of flesh defy the tools of men? Why should one life appear to stand apart from all others? These are not questions of hunting. They are questions of order. The sea does not answer them. It continues its motion without pause. Yet the mind, faced with this silence, does not remain still. It seeks shape. It seeks a form upon which it can strike. Thus, the whale becomes not only an animal, but a symbol, not because it chooses to be, but because it is chosen. The captain's thought moves in long circles around this image. It does not rest upon small details. It does not concern itself with the ordinary labor of the ship. It rises instead to a single height, from which all else appears smaller. To follow such a thought is to leave behind many others. The land, with its towns and laws, fades from importance. The sea, with its countless creatures, narrows to one. The voyage, with its many days, becomes a single movement toward a single end. This narrowing is not sudden. It grows with each mile. The ship seems to draw closer not only to a place upon the water, but to a shape within the mind. For some, this shape brings clarity. For others, it brings unease. Yet none can escape its presence once it has taken hold. Even silence begins to speak of it. The creak of the masts becomes a reminder of waiting. The cry of birds becomes a sign of distance. The long calm of the sea becomes a question without words. In such a world, loneliness takes on a new form. It is not the loneliness of being without companions, for the ship is full of men. It is the loneliness of standing between two forces that do not speak the same language, the will of a man and the movement of the sea. The captain stands at this meeting point. His body bears the mark of an earlier encounter, and his mind carries its echo. He moves upon the deck like a figure shaped by both water and thought, neither wholly one nor the other. To the crew, he appears as command. To himself, he appears as continuation. He does not believe he began this voyage. He believes he has merely resumed it. The past stands before him as clearly as the future. The whale that was once seen is the whale that will be seen again. Between these two moments lies the present, shaped only as a bridge. Thus, the sea becomes a stage upon which memory walks forward. For those who sail with him, this movement is felt rather than understood. They sense that the course is firm, even when the water shifts. They sense that something waits ahead, even when nothing appears upon the surface. And so, the voyage becomes more than travel. It becomes a meditation upon struggle. Between man and nature, between purpose and motion, between the wish to know and the silence of what is, the waves continue their pattern. The sails hold their wind. The ship holds its course. And within this steady movement, a single thought remains unbroken, that to pursue the whale is to pursue the meaning of resistance itself. Not to conquer it, not to explain it, but to meet it face to face upon the open sea. For a long time, the sea had offered little change. Days followed one another with steady motion, and the ship moved as though along a line already drawn. Then, without clear cause, the air began to shift. It did not rise as a storm. There was no sudden wind, no dark wall of cloud rising at once upon the horizon. Instead, the change came quietly, like a thought entering the mind without sound. The sky grew pale and thin. Clouds stretched across it in long, uneven shapes, neither heavy nor light, but resting in place as though unwilling to move. The sun passed behind them without warmth, and the light upon the water lost its brightness. The sea itself appeared calm, yet its calmness felt altered. The waves no longer followed the familiar pattern. They rose at uneven intervals, their surfaces dull and without reflection. The sound against the hull remained steady, but it lacked its former rhythm. Men upon the deck noticed this change without speaking of it. They moved as before, yet their eyes returned often to the horizon. Each man sensed that the water was no longer offering itself freely to sight. At night, the stars appeared faint. Some were hidden entirely, while others shone with a cold and distant light. The sky seemed deeper than before, and the ship smaller beneath it. Even the familiar sounds of the rigging carried differently, as though the air itself had grown thicker. It was during one such night that talk of signs began to pass quietly among the crew, not shouted, and not argued, but shared in low voices near the rail or below deck. One man spoke of a dream in which the sea lay flat as stone. Another said he had seen a bird fly against the wind and vanish without cry. A third mentioned the way the ship's shadow had fallen strangely upon the water at sunset. These words carried no clear meaning on their own, yet together they formed a pattern that men of the sea recognized without naming. Queequeg watched these signs with calm attention. To him, such changes were not warnings alone, but messages. The ocean, he believed, spoke not in events, but in small departures from habit. To notice these was not to fear them, but to listen. One morning, as the watch was changed, a murmur passed along the deck. The helmsman had felt something unusual beneath his hand. The wheel did not answer with its usual weight. It seemed to resist, then to turn more easily than expected. As though the ship herself were uncertain of her path, the compass was examined. Its needle did not rest as it should. Instead of pointing steadily, it wavered, moving slightly back and forth before settling. No great error could be seen, yet the movement itself was enough to draw attention. Instruments were checked again and again. The captain was informed, and he came to the deck to look upon the compass with his own eyes. He did not speak at once. He watched the needle as one watches a living thing, noting not only where it pointed, but how it moved. At last, he nodded. The matter was not discussed further. The course was held, and the ship moved on. Yet from that moment, the sea seemed less open. The water ahead appeared darker, though the sky had not changed its color. The horizon, once clear and wide, seemed to draw inward, as though the world itself were narrowing. The wind shifted without warning. It came from different directions within the same hour, touching the sails uncertainly. They filled, then slackened, then filled again, never settling into a steady pull. The crew adjusted the canvas as needed, working with quiet precision. There was no haste and no alarm, yet each man felt the strain of attention grow sharper. The sea was no longer offering its path freely. In the evenings, the light faded more quickly. The line between water and sky blurred, and the ship appeared to float within a single field of gray. Distance became difficult to judge. Sounds traveled strangely, sometimes reaching far, sometimes falling away at once. It was said that in such moments, the sea hides its depth. It draws the surface close to itself and leaves the air uncertain. Some among the crew spoke of prophecy, not in clear words and not with certainty, but as sailors have always done, by recalling old stories. They spoke of voyages that had begun in similar quiet, of ships that had felt the same strange calm before great change. These stories did not name what would come. They named only the feeling that comes before it. The captain listened to none of this openly. He stood upon the quarter-deck, his gaze fixed forward, as though the surface of the sea might yet reveal something beneath it. His presence remained steady, unaltered by the unease that moved among the men. To him, these signs were not obstacles. They were confirmations. The sea, in withholding its calm, seemed to acknowledge the course set upon it. Resistance, even in this quiet form, was a sign that something lay ahead. Thus, what others felt as uncertainty, he accepted as alignment. Night after night, the ship moved through this altered stillness. The waves whispered rather than spoke. The wind touched the sails as though testing them. The compass needle continued its small, uneasy movements. Sleep came more lightly. Dreams returned more often. Men woke with the sense of having heard something call them from the water, though no sound had reached their ears. Yet still no storm broke. The sky held its clouds. The sea held its depth. The ship held its course. It was as though the world itself were pausing, gathering its breath before a change too large to name. In this waiting, the true tension of the voyage emerged, not in violence, not in noise, but in the quiet knowledge that the familiar order had begun to loosen. The sea was no longer merely wide, it was watchful, and the ship moved forward, not knowing what shape the next horizon would take, only that it would not be the same as the last. As the days passed, the unease that had first appeared as a faint change in the air became more firmly rooted. In the life of the ship, it did not rise as fear, but as a quiet awareness that the sea had begun to hold something back. The clouds no longer drifted freely, they gathered in layers, spreading across the sky like thin cloth laid one upon another. Light reached the deck only in pale fragments, and the color of the water deepened into long shades of gray and blue. The wind did not strengthen, yet it lost its steadiness. It touched the sails from shifting directions, testing their hold. The canvas filled, then loosened, then filled again, as though unsure which way to draw the ship forward. Men spoke less. The work continued, but words were spared. Each sound of rope or step of boots stood out more clearly against the softened voice of the sea. Even laughter, when it came, seemed to fall quickly back into silence. At times, the ship appeared to move through a space without depth. The horizon blurred, and distance lost its measure. Water and sky seemed joined into a single field, without edge or division. In such moments, the mind could not easily rest upon any fixed point. Queequeg watched the sky and the water as he watched all things, without haste and without doubt. To him, the sea did not threaten. It only changed its way of speaking. He said little, but his eyes followed the movement of clouds and waves as though reading a slow and careful text. One evening, the light faded sooner than expected. The sun disappeared behind a low curtain of cloud, and the ship entered night without the usual long descent of color. Lamps were lit below deck, and the watch took its place beneath a sky where few stars could be seen. The sea's sound grew softer, as though its voice were being held back. The waves still struck the hull, but without their former pattern. Each came alone, separated from the next by uncertain pauses. It was then that the captain came again upon the deck. He did not call the crew together, nor did he change the ship's course. He stood in his usual place, leaning upon his staff, and looked out across the darkened water. His figure appeared fixed against the shifting light, like a mark drawn upon the moving world. Those who saw him felt a steadying force in his presence. Whatever the sea withheld, he did not. His posture remained unchanged, and his gaze held the same direction as before. In this stillness, a kind of readiness grew. It did not show itself in hurried movement or raised voices. It appeared instead as a careful attention to small things. Ropes were checked twice. Knots were tested with quiet hands. The sails were trimmed with more care than usual. The compass was watched more often. Its needle still wavered slightly before settling. Each movement was noted, then accepted, as though the ship were learning a new way of pointing. Below deck, the men lay in their hammocks with lighter sleep. Dreams came easily and passed without shape. Some woke with the sense of having heard distant water where none could be heard. Others felt the slow roll of the ship as though it were the breathing of some greater body beneath them. No storm yet broke. The sea did not rise against the hull, nor did the wind strike the sails with force. All remained within the bounds of calm. Yet this calm no longer carried ease. It carried waiting. In such waiting, the thoughts of men turned inward. Some remembered past voyages and the changes that had come without warning. Others recalled words spoken long ago by older sailors, who said that the ocean does not always show its purpose in action. Sometimes it shows it in delay. To sail through such a pause was to move between what had been and what had not yet appeared. The captain did not speak of these things. He remained as he had always been, fixed in course, unmoved by surface signs. Yet those who watched him saw that his attention had grown sharper. His eyes did not wander across the sea. They rested upon it as one might rest upon a question. Thus, the ship entered a new stage of the voyage. Not the chase, not the storm, but the moment before either. A moment in which the sea seemed to hold its breath, and the ship learned to do the same. Each sunrise came with the same muted light. Each night closed without the full darkness of stars. The wind moved in small trials rather than long pulls. The water changed its sound without changing its shape. In this world of slight departures, the ordinary rules of the voyage felt loosened. Time passed, yet it did not advance in the usual way. It seemed to widen rather than move forward. The crew adapted to this as sailors always have, by continuing their work, and by keeping their silence. What lay ahead was not yet visible, but what lay behind had already begun to fade. The voyage stood between these two distances, held in place by the steady movement of the ship. Thus, the signs of trouble did not announce themselves with force. They arrived as a change in tone, a difference in light, a shift in sound, a pause in the familiar order. And in this quiet change, the path of the voyage bent slightly, as though turning toward something that could not yet be named. The sea did not rise, the wind did not cry out, the ship did not turn away. It moved on, carrying with it the sense that what had been only rumor and thought was drawing closer to the surface of the world. The morning came without color. The sky held a pale light, and the sea lay beneath it in long, unbroken lines. The ship moved forward as it had for many days, with no change in her course and no sign upon the water. Men took their places upon the deck in quiet order. The watches were changed, and the work of the day began without word. Yet something in the air seemed thinner than before, as though the space between sea and sky had drawn closer together. It was during this stillness that the first sign appeared, not as a sudden cry, and not as a great movement of water, but as a small change upon the surface. Far ahead, where the horizon met the pale light, a faint line rose and fell. At first, it could not be named. It might have been a wave or the shadow of a cloud. It appeared, then vanished, then appeared again. A man at the mast paused in his work and looked longer than before. He did not call out at once. His eyes followed the movement, measuring it against the slow motion of the sea. When it rose again, higher than the surrounding water, he spoke. "There," he said. The word passed along the deck without force. Men turned their faces toward the line he pointed to. The shape showed itself once more, and this time it held its place long enough to be seen. It was not dark like other backs that had appeared before. It did not blend with the blue or gray of the water. It shone faintly, as though the sea itself had grown pale in that one place. No cry of chase followed. The ship did not change her speed. The sails did not turn. Only the eyes of the crew moved, resting upon the distant form. As it rose again, a low murmur passed among the men. Some leaned upon the rail. Others stood still where they were, their hands resting upon rope or wood. The shape moved slowly, rising and sinking in long measure. It did not flee, nor did it turn toward the ship. It held its path as though the vessel were not there. Queequeg watched it without change of expression. His gaze followed its movement calmly, as though he were reading a familiar sign. To me, the sight carried a different weight. The stories that had passed through the ship returned at once to the mind, of a pale back upon the sea, of scars upon white flesh, of a creature that did not move like others, yet no name was spoken. The captain had not yet appeared upon the deck. The crew did not call him. They waited. The sea remained quiet. No waves rose around the distant form. The sky did not darken. Everything held its place as though waiting for a word that had not yet been given. After a time, the shape dipped beneath the surface and did not return. The water closed over it without trace. The horizon resumed its former line, and the pale light returned to its earlier sameness. Men did not speak of what they had seen. They returned slowly to their tasks. The ropes were taken up again, and the sails were watched as before, yet the movement of hands had changed. Each action was measured. Each sound seemed louder than before. The sea, which had appeared empty moments earlier, now seemed to hide something within it. The captain came upon the deck soon after. He did not ask what had been seen. He walked to the rail and looked out upon the water ahead. His eyes did not search widely. They rested upon a single place where the shape had last appeared. He stood thus for a long moment. Then he gave a quiet command. The course was not changed, but the ship's speed was slightly adjusted. The sails were trimmed with care, and the long boats were examined where they lay along the sides. No word of pursuit was spoken, yet the ship had begun to prepare. Men checked the ropes that lay coiled upon the deck. Harpoons were examined, their points cleaned and set in order. The boats were lowered a little, then raised again, as though testing their balance. All this was done without haste and without sound. It was not yet the time to move, but it was the time to be ready. The crew did not gather in one place. They remained scattered across the deck, each man close to his work, yet a single attention seemed to join them. Their eyes returned often to the horizon, not searching widely, but resting upon it as one rests upon a question. The sea did not answer. The water showed only its surface. The sky offered only its pale light. The shape that had risen before did not appear again. Thus, the first meeting passed without event. No chase followed, no cry was given, no blow was struck. Yet the voyage had entered another stage. What had been rumor and thought had now taken form upon the water. The white whale had not yet been named, but he had been seen. From this moment onward, the sea no longer appeared as a field without sign. It had shown that something moved beneath it, something whose color did not belong to the ordinary play of light and wave. The ship moved on. Her course remained steady. Her sails held their wind. Her deck returned to quiet labor. But beneath this calm, a line had been drawn between what had been unseen and what had now appeared. The water closed again over its depth. The horizon returned to its place, and the men of the ship waited. The day did not change its color, yet the meaning of the water before us had altered. The ship moved on through the pale light, and the surface of the sea showed only its usual motion. Still, the memory of what had risen once and sunk again remained present in every thought. Men watched the horizon more closely now. Their eyes did not roam from side to side. They returned again and again to the same narrow line where sea and sky met, as though that line might open and reveal what lay beneath it. It was not long before the shape returned. This time it rose more clearly, lifting a wide portion of its back above the surface. The water slid from it in smooth sheets, and the pale color held its place long enough to be known. A breath rose with it, white against the thin sky. No man cried out. The sound of the ship remained unchanged. Only the motion of bodies showed that something had appeared. Hands paused upon rope. Feet stopped where they stood. Faces turned toward the same point upon the water. The creature did not rush away. It moved as though following a path that belonged only to itself. Its course lay neither toward the ship nor from it. It passed across the line of sight in slow measure, rising and falling as though marking time. From the deck, the whale seemed less an animal than a moving shore. Its back showed scars, long pale lines that crossed its surface and vanished again beneath the water. These marks did not appear as wounds newly given, but as traces of earlier meetings, carried forward through time. A murmur passed among the crew. Some spoke the name at last, quietly, without emphasis. Others said nothing, yet their eyes did not leave the water. The word moved among them like a low wind. The white whale. The captain stood upon the quarter-deck, his figure steady against the light. He did not raise his ice. He did not strike the rail or point his staff. He only watched. The whale rose once more, then sank. The water closed over it, leaving only a faint line of disturbance that spread and faded. For a moment, the sea showed nothing else. Then the captain spoke. His words were few. He did not describe what had been seen. He did not repeat the stories that had filled the ship before. He gave only one direction. The ship would follow the course where the whale had passed. The order moved quietly through the deck. Sails were adjusted, not sharply, but with small changes of angle. The rudder turned a little, enough to set the ship upon a line parallel to the creature's path. The long boats were examined once more. Their ropes were freed from tight coil and laid ready. The harpoons were brought into clearer reach. Knives were placed where the hand would find them without search. Still, no boat was lowered. The ship did not rush forward. It did not close the distance between itself and the place where the whale had been seen. It moved only as it had moved before. But now its direction had meaning. The crew felt this change more than they heard it. Before, they had watched the water as one watches an empty road. Now they watched it as one watches a trail that has been marked. The sea did not resist this new course. The wind held its light pull upon the sails. The surface of the water remained smooth. The horizon kept its place. Yet beneath this calm, a single line of motion had been drawn. Queequeg stood beside me, his gaze resting upon the place where the whale had passed. His face showed no fear, nor did it show excitement. It held only attention to him. The whale was not a sign of sudden change, but a continuation. The path of the creature and the path of the ship had crossed for a moment. Now they would run alongside one another, at least for a time. Among the other men, feelings rose and fell without words. Some felt the nearness of danger. Though no blow had yet been struck, others felt the nearness of purpose, as though the long waiting of the voyage had at last been given shape. For myself, I felt the sea grow narrower, not in distance, but in direction. The wide field of water that had once appeared without end now seemed to hold a single road within it. The whale had not only appeared, it had set a course. The captain remained upon the deck as the light shifted and the day passed. His eyes did not leave the water ahead. He did not measure the distance by sight alone, but by something carried within him, something that did not depend upon the surface of the sea. Thus the pursuit began without sound. No shout announced it. No oars struck the water. No iron touched flesh. It began instead as a quiet turning of the ship, a slight change in the angle of sails. A steady gaze held upon the place where pale form had moved. From this moment onward, the voyage was no longer guided only by wind and season. It was guided by a memory made visible. The white whale had risen, had shown himself, and had passed on, and the ship had turned to follow. The ship now moved with a purpose that did not belong to wind alone. Her course was shaped by the memory of the pale form that had crossed the water before her bow. Though the sea still appeared wide, the path within it had grown narrow. Day followed day with little outward change. The surface of the ocean remained calm, and the sky held its pale light. Yet beneath this sameness, the direction of the voyage had become firm. Men no longer watched the horizon as one watches an empty field. They watched it as one watches a trail that must be read. Their eyes returned again and again to the same line where sea and sky met, not searching for movement, but waiting for it. The captain stood upon the quarter-deck as before. His posture did not change. His gaze did not wander. He did not speak often, yet when he did, his words were shaped only for the course of the ship. Sails were adjusted with care. The rudder held a steady line. The ship neither hurried nor delayed. She moved as though guided by something that lay just beyond sight. From time to time, the whale appeared again. It rose at a distance, its back showing faintly above the surface. The water slid from it without sound. A white breath lifted into the thin sky and vanished. Then the creature sank, leaving only a spreading ring upon the sea. Each time this happened, the ship held her course. She did not close the distance suddenly. She did not turn aside. She followed the line left by the whale's passing. As one follows the mark of a moving star, no boat was lowered. No weapon was raised. The pursuit did not yet belong to action. It belonged to alignment. The crew felt this change in the way time passed. Hours no longer seemed to drift without purpose. Each watch was measured against the next. not by labor alone, but by distance gained upon the creature ahead. Queequeg moved among the boats and the tools with quiet readiness. He examined the ropes and the iron points, not with haste, but with steady hands. To him, the work had not yet begun. It remained only preparation. Among the others, thoughts moved in different ways. Some felt the nearness of the hunt. Though nothing had yet been done, others felt the narrowing of the voyage. As though many possible paths had closed into one, a few felt only the familiar labor of the sea, unchanged by the shape that rose and fell ahead. At night, the whale was not seen. The sea returned to its darkness, and the stars resumed their distant order. Yet even then, the ship did not forget the path set before it. Her course remained the same, held by memory rather than by sight. Dreams came more often. Men spoke of water that moved without sound, of pale forms beneath the surface, of paths that led neither to land nor to sky. These dreams did not disturb them. They passed like waves, leaving no mark. The captain remained awake through many watches. When he slept, it was for short hours only. His presence upon the deck became part of the ship's shape, as fixed as mast or rail. To those who observed him, he appeared not driven by anger nor lifted by hope. He was moved by something quieter and more constant. The sea did not stand before him as a field of chance. It stood as a space already marked. Each sighting of the whale confirmed this mark. The creature did not flee. It did not turn toward the ship. It continued upon its own course, as though unaware of what followed it. Yet its path and the ship's path ran side by side, separated only by distance and by time. Thus, the pursuit took on a strange form. Not a chase, not a battle, but a long following. The water between ship and whale did not shrink. It held its measure. The horizon did not break. It remained a line that moved with both. In this quiet movement, the tension of the voyage deepened without rising to the surface. The sea did not grow rough. The wind did not cry out. The ship did not strain. All things remained within the bounds of calm. Yet the calm no longer belonged to rest. It belonged to waiting. Waiting for the moment when the distance would close. Waiting for the time when preparation would turn into action. Waiting for the place where following would become meeting. The men of the ship did not speak of this often. They carried it instead in their movements and in their silence, each rope laid in order, each tool placed within reach. Each watch taken without complaint was part of this waiting. The whale rose and fell again. Far ahead, its pale back shone faintly, then disappeared. The ship followed, not as one who runs, but as one who walks toward a point that does not move. Thus, the pursuit began. Not with speed, not with sound, but with a steady course drawn upon the sea. The following of the whale did not end in a single day. It stretched across many hours, then many more, until the movement of the ship seemed shaped entirely by the pale line that appeared and vanished ahead of her bow. The sea remained calm. The wind continued its light work upon the sails. Yet the meaning of each small change in water and sky grew greater. A slight turn of the surface became a sign. A faint shadow beneath the waves became a question. The captain's will now showed itself more clearly. He stood upon the deck with his eyes fixed forward, not upon the men, nor upon the sails, but upon the water where the whale had last been seen. He spoke rarely, yet when he did, his words were directed only toward one purpose, to keep the ship upon the path that had been marked. There was no anger in his voice. There was no cry of command meant to stir the blood. His tone was steady, as though the course had already been chosen long before this moment, and now required only to be followed. The crew felt the steadiness pass into their own actions. They moved without hurry and without delay. The ropes were laid ready. The boats were kept in order. Each man stood closer to his tools than before, not from fear, but from attention. The distance between ship and whale grew slowly smaller, not in great leaps, but in measures so small they could not be named. At times the whale rose nearer than before. Its back showed more clearly, and the scars upon it appeared as pale lines against pale flesh. The breath that rose from its head drifted longer in the air before fading. At other times it sank and did not appear again for many minutes. During these pauses, the sea returned to its sameness, and the men waited. Waiting became part of the pursuit. It was no longer a space between actions. It was the action itself. The ship did not rush forward when the whale appeared. She did not fall back when it vanished. She held the same steady motion, guided by memory rather than by sight. Queequeg remained ready beside the boats. His hands touched the ropes and the iron with the same calm care as before. To him, the moment of striking had not yet come. It existed only as something that would arrive in its own time. Among the other men, thoughts gathered without voice. Some imagined the moment when the boats would be lowered and the oars would strike the water. Others imagined only the pale body rising closer and closer, filling the space between ship and horizon. Yet no one spoke of this aloud. The captain did not call for haste. He seemed to measure the whale not by distance alone, but by something deeper. He watched its rising and sinking as one watches the motion of a clock. Each appearance marked a passing of time, not an opening for attack. In this way, the pursuit took on a strange stillness. The ship moved, the whale moved, yet neither appeared to approach the other in the usual sense. They traveled together, to paths drawn upon the same water, held apart by a space that did not close at once. The sea offered no resistance to this movement. It did not rise in waves. It did not darken in storm. It carried both ship and creature with equal calm. Even the sky seemed to watch without change. Day faded into evening, and evening into night. The whale was no longer seen in the darkness, but the line of pursuit remained. The captain did not alter course when sight was lost. He held the direction as though the whale were still visible. Stars appeared and moved across the sky. The water reflected them in broken lines. The ship passed through these reflections without sound. Men took their watches in silence. Sleep came lightly. Dreams rose and fell with the movement of the hull. Some dreamed of pale water, others of long paths without end. These dreams did not disturb them. They passed as the sea passed, without leaving mark. When morning returned, the whale appeared again. It rose farther ahead than before, yet still within sight. The water slid from its back in the same slow way. Its breath lifted and vanished. The pursuit continued. Now the distance felt less like space and more like time. Not how far, but how long. The captain's figure upon the deck seemed carved into place. His body bore the mark of an old meeting with this creature, and his mind carried that meeting forward into the present. For him, this following was not new. It was the resuming of something once begun. The sea did not deny him this. It did not grant him speed. It did not offer him battle. It only allowed the two paths to run together. Thus, the chase became a line drawn across days rather than across water. Each hour was a step. Each sighting was a mark. Each silence was part of the same motion. The crew felt the narrowing of the voyage more than the narrowing of distance. The world that had once seemed wide now appeared shaped around a single form. The horizon did not hold many possibilities. It held one, the white whale. Not as prey alone, but as the center of the ship's movement. The sea still whispered along the hull. The wind still pressed upon the sails. The sky still passed from light to dark. Yet within this unchanged world, a single purpose moved forward without rest. Thus the pursuit deepened, not in speed, not in violence, but in the steady drawing together of two paths that had once been far apart. Ship and whale, memory and sight, will, and motion, all moving toward a meeting that had not yet taken form upon the water. The distance between the ship and the whale no longer belonged only to sight. It belonged to movement. Each rise of the pail back upon the water marked a change not in place, but in time. The two paths that had long run side by side now began to turn toward one another. The sea remained calm. No great waves stood between ship and creature. No wind cried out against the sails. The surface of the water lay open, showing only its slow and patient motion. Yet within this calm, the meaning of every movement had grown heavier. The whale rose closer now. Its back showed more fully above the surface, and the scars upon it appeared clearer than before. They crossed its body in long white lines, as though the sea itself had written upon it. When it breathed, the sound carried faintly across the water, not loud, but steady. The ship answered with no cry. She did not rush forward. She did not fall back. She held her course as she had held it through all the days of following. Her sails kept their light pull upon the wind, and her hull moved with even weight upon the sea. The captain stood upon the quarterdeck, his staff resting against the planks. His eyes did not leave the water ahead. He did not call the men to their places yet. He waited. This waiting did not belong to doubt. It belonged to measure. The crew felt the change without words. They moved closer to the boats. Though none had been ordered to do so, the ropes lay ready. The iron points were within reach. The space upon the deck grew clearer, as though prepared for something that had not yet arrived. Queequeg stood near the bow, his harpoon resting against his shoulder. His posture did not change. He did not look toward the captain, nor toward the other men. His gaze followed only the slow path of the whale's rising and sinking. The water between ship and whale appeared thinner than before. Not in depth, but in meaning. Each time the creature rose, it remained above the surface a little longer. Each time it sank, it left behind a wider ring upon the sea. The air around it seemed lighter, as though touched by its passing. No sound of alarm passed through the deck. The moment did not arrive as a sudden thing. It came as a continuation of what had already begun. The pursuit did not change its nature. It only drew closer to its form. The captain lifted his head slightly. He did not speak at once. He allowed the ship to move another length upon the water. Then he gave a single command, low and even. The long boats were to be made ready. Men moved without haste. They did not run. They did not call to one another. The oars were set in place. The ropes were loosened. The boats were lowered partway, then held. Still, no boat touched the water. The whale rose again, nearer than before. From the deck, its form appeared less like a distant shore and more like a body moving through space. The curve of its back could be traced with the eye. The pale color no longer blended with the water. It stood apart from it. The breath rose from its head and drifted toward the ship before fading. The sea between them held no barrier. It did not break into foam. It did not darken. It remained open and waiting. The captain watched. His body did not lean forward. His voice did not rise. His staff did not strike the deck. Yet in his stillness, the purpose of the voyage gathered into a single point. This was no longer the following of a trail. It was the approaching of a presence. The crew felt this without knowing how. Their hands rested upon their tools, not in fear, but in readiness. Their eyes did not search widely now. They remained fixed upon the water ahead. Time seemed to widen rather than pass. The moments between the whale's appearances grew shorter. The distance between ship and creature narrowed until it could be felt rather than measured. Still, the captain did not give the order to lower the boats. He waited for the line between the two paths to cross fully. The sea did not interrupt this waiting. It did not rise against the hull. It did not turn the ship aside. it did not hide the whale beneath sudden waves. It held all three, the ship, the whale, and the space between them, in the same calm field. Thus, the final approach took its shape, not as a rush, not as a shout, but as a slow drawing together of two movements that had long been separate. Ship and whale moved upon the same water. Memory and sight met upon the surface. Will and motion began to share a single line. The crew stood ready. The boats hung above the sea. The whale rose again, nearer still. And in this quiet closeness, the long pursuit passed into its last form. Not yet the strike, not yet the struggle, but the moment before both. The whale now rose almost directly before the ship. The water that separated it from the bow appeared no longer as distance, but as a thin layer of motion. Its back showed in a long pale curve, and the scars upon it were no longer faint lines, but clear marks carried forward from other times and other meetings. The sea did not change. It did not lift in waves. It did not darken beneath clouds. It did not sound with wind. It held the ship and the creature together in the same open field. The captain stepped forward upon the deck. He did not raise his voice. He did not call out the name of the whale. He did not speak of what had been lost or what was to be taken. He spoke only to the men and to the water between them, and the pale body ahead. The boats were to be lowered. The order passed without echo. Ropes were loosened. The long boats touched the sea with little sound. Oars were set into the water, and the men took their places. The ship remained where she was, holding her line upon the surface. The whale rose again, nearer than before. Its breath lifted into the air and drifted slowly away. From the boats, the creature appeared larger than it had from the deck. The water around it moved in wide circles, as though its body shaped the sea even in stillness. The captain's boat moved forward with the others. His posture did not change. His eyes remained fixed upon the whale. The space between them closed without hurry. The whale turned slightly. Its great body shifted beneath the surface, and the curve of its back altered its line. The water slid from it in smooth sheets, and its tail appeared for a moment before sinking again. No cry rose from the boats. No shout marked the distance. The oars entered the water in slow, even strokes, each movement of wood against sea carried the men forward without sound. The captain stood at the front of his boat, his iron held ready. His face showed neither anger nor fear. It showed only direction. The whale rose again. This time, it remained above the surface longer than before. The scars upon its back shone in the pale light. Its breath sounded faintly, not as a cry, but as a steady release of air. The boats drew nearer. The sea between them did not break. It did not close. It remained as open as it had been at the beginning of the voyage. In this openness, the meaning of the meeting grew clear. The whale did not flee. The ship did not turn away. Both held their lines. The captain lifted his arm. The motion was slow and measured. The iron did not flash. It did not strike at once. It waited in the air as the distance closed by. Another small measure. Time did not seem to pass in moments. It passed in movements. The oars entered the water. The whale rose and sank. The iron waited in the hand. Round them, the sea remained unchanged. Its surface reflected the light without distortion. Its depth hid what it had always hidden. When the whale rose again, it did so within a space that could no longer be called distant. The pale body filled the field of vision. The water pressed against it. The air around it seemed thin. The captain's gaze did not waver. His arm moved. The iron left his hand and passed into the space between man and creature. It did not fly as an arrow flies. It traveled as part of the same motion that had carried the ship across the sea. The point met the pale body. There was no great sound. There was no cry. Only the meeting of iron and flesh beneath the open sky. The whale did not sink at once. It did not turn at once. It held its place for a brief moment, as though marking the meeting that had long been drawn toward it. Then its body moved. The water around it shifted. The wide curve of its back bent, and the surface of the sea changed its shape. The boats were drawn into this movement, not as into a storm, but as into a single, widening circle. The ropes that joined iron to boat tightened. The oars struck the water with new force. The men held their places without voice. The whale moved forward, not in flight, not in attack, but in the long motion of its own path. The sea accepted this motion without resistance. It opened before the creature and closed behind it, carrying with it the small boats and the lines that bound them. The ship remained behind. Her sails did not change their pull. Her hull did not turn. She stood as the place from which the meeting had come. The boats followed the whale's movement across the surface. The line between them and the creature remained unbroken. The water widened around them and narrowed again. The captain did not turn his eyes from the pale body ahead. His posture remained the same as it had been upon the deck. He did not speak. He did not call out. He allowed the motion of the whale to carry him forward. Thus, the long pursuit became the long meeting. Not in violence alone, not in sudden change, but in the joining of two paths that had been drawn toward one another. From the first day of the voyage, ship and sea remained behind. Man and creature moved forward, and the open water held them both. The movement of the whale carried the boats forward across the open water. The line that bound iron to flesh drew them onward without sound. The sea did not resist this motion. It did not rise in anger. It opened and closed as it always had, holding both creature and men within its wide field. The ship remained behind. From the boats, her masts stood still against the pale sky, their lines unbroken by wind or cloud. She appeared distant now, not only in space, but in meaning. What had begun upon her deck had passed beyond her hull. The whale turned. Its great body shifted beneath the surface, and the water around it bent into new shapes. The motion of its tail spread outward in long circles, and the boats were drawn into this widening path. The ropes tightened. Men held their places. Oars struck the water with measured force. No voice rose above the sound of movement. The whale did not leap. It did not strike upward. It moved forward with the weight of its own course. The sea followed this movement without question. Behind them, the ship began to change. Those who remained upon her deck saw the water alter its line around the hull. The surface near her side grew darker, not with storm, but with depth. The wide circles drawn by the whale's passing reached her position and pressed against her shape. The hull answered this pressure with slow motion. Not a sudden turn, not a sharp break, but a long yielding. The ship leaned. Her masts tilted against the sky, and the light upon her sides shifted. The water reached higher along her planks than before, as though testing the boundary between what floated and what sank. The men upon the boats felt this change without seeing it. The pull of the rope altered. The motion of the sea beneath them grew heavier. The line between ship and whale stretched across the water like a drawn path. The whale moved again. Its body curved, and its tail struck the surface with slow force. The water broke outward in wide sheets. The boats rose and fell within these waves, not as in storm, but as within the breathing of something vast. The rope that bound the iron to the creature ran back toward the ship. And through that line, the motion passed. The hull groaned. It was not a sound of sudden breaking. It was the sound of weight meeting depth. Planks bent. Water entered where it had not been before. The sea did not rush in, it spread. The ship no longer held her shape against the water. She yielded to it, slowly and without struggle. From the boats, the change appeared as a lowering of the masts. At first, It seemed as though the horizon had risen. Then it became clear that the ship herself was descending. Her sails did not tear. Her flags did not fall. They moved downward with her, keeping their form as the water rose around them. The men upon the boats did not cry out. They watched. The whale continued forward, drawing the line across the surface. The boats followed in its path. The ship fell behind them, not by distance alone, but by descent. Water reached the deck, then the rail, then the base of the masts. The sea closed around the hull without sound. What had once carried the voyage now passed into the depth it had crossed. The ship did not vanish at once. Her shape remained visible beneath the surface for a time, as though held there by memory. Then the light above shifted. The water closed. Only the open sea remained. The whale moved on. The rope between it and the boats slackened, then tightened again as the creature altered its course. The men in the boats held their places. Their eyes turned not toward the place where the ship had been, but toward the pale body ahead. The motion did not cease. The whale did not turn back. The sea did not restore what it had taken. The path of the voyage did not return to its beginning. The boats were carried forward until the line that bound them to the creature loosened and fell away. The iron that had struck its mark did not return. It passed with the whale into the distance. At last, the boats were left upon the open water. No ship stood behind them. No land lay before them. Only the wide surface of the sea remained. The men gathered themselves within the boats. They did not speak of what had passed. They did not call out the name of the ship. They held their places and looked upon the water that had closed over it. Above them, the sky remained pale. Around them, the sea remained calm. What had ended did not leave a sound. It left only space. The motion of the whale faded from sight. The line of its passing spread and vanished. The water returned to its ordinary pattern, as though nothing had marked it. Yet the voyage had ended, not with fire, not with storm, but with a long descent into silence. And upon the open sea, what remained was not the ship, but the men who had been carried away from her. The sea closed over the place where the ship had been. No broken mast remained above the surface. No sail showed itself in the light. The water returned to its level path, spreading outward in wide, quiet rings. For a time, there was no movement. The boats that had followed the whale were no longer held by its motion. They rested upon the water as though set there by chance. The men within them looked across the surface, not knowing where to place their eyes. The sky remained unchanged. The horizon did not bend. The sea did not darken. Only the ship was gone. The men spoke little. Some looked toward the place where the hull had vanished. Others turned their gaze outward, as though searching for something that might rise again. Their hands rested upon the edges of the boats, feeling the slow lift and fall of the water beneath them. Time passed without measure. The sun moved across the pale sky. The light shifted from one side of the boats to the other. The sea remained open and wide. One by one, the boats drifted apart, not by design, not by command, but by the gentle pull of water moving in different lines. Each carried its small number of men upon the same endless surface. Their voices did not reach one another. Their shapes became smaller as distance grew between them. Some boats moved toward the place where the whale had passed. Others turned without knowing why. None returned to the place where the ship had gone down. The sea accepted them all without change. Among these drifting forms, one remained alone. His boat had been broken in the movement of the whale. Its sides no longer held the water. It did not rise and fall as the others did. It sank slowly, taking with it what remained of its shape. The man who had been in it did not cry out. He did not call to the others. He did not strike the water with his hands. He did not speak. He rose from the broken wood and found himself held upon the surface by a small floating shape that remained from the voyage. It was not a boat. It was not a mast. It was not a sail. It was a coffin-shaped piece of wood, sealed and shaped for rest rather than for travel. It floated as the ship had floated, but without motion of its own. The man drew himself upon it and lay there without movement. The sea held him, not as it had held the ship, not as it had held the whale, but as it holds all things that remain upon its surface for a time. Round him, the water stretched without end. Above him, the sky passed without sound. He did not know how long he lay thus. The sun rose and fell. The light shifted from bright to dim and back again. The sea changed its color with the passing hours. No ship appeared upon the horizon. No bird crossed the sky. No sound reached him from any shore. The movement of the water beneath him was slow and steady. It did not carry him in one direction alone. It turned him gently, first toward one side of the horizon, then toward another. In this turning, his thoughts grew quiet. The noise of the ship was gone. The voices of the crew were gone. The weight of the voyage had passed. What remained was only the open space between sky and sea. He did not struggle against the space. He lay upon the floating wood and allowed the water to bear him. His body rose and fell with the motion beneath it. His eyes followed the changing light upon the surface. At times, the sea appeared empty. At times, it seemed filled with unseen motion. Clouds passed above him. Their shadows crossed the water. The horizon remained a long, unbroken line. In this stillness, the memory of the voyage did not return in images of action. It returned as distance, distance from the land, distance from the ship, distance from the beginning. What had once seemed a long journey now felt like a single movement that had already passed. The sea did not ask him where he had come from. It did not ask him where he would go. It carried him without question. Night came. Stars appeared above him, reflected faintly upon the water below. The space between sky and sea seemed to widen, holding him within it as a small mark between two fields of light. He felt no fear, not because there was no danger, but because danger no longer had shape. What had taken the ship had already passed. What might come could not yet be seen. Thus, he rested upon the surface of the water as upon a moving ground. Sleep came and went. Dreams rose and fell without form. Sometimes he dreamed of the ship moving forward across a calm sea. Sometimes he dreamed of the pale body rising and sinking ahead of her. These dreams did not disturb him. They passed as the water passed. When he woke, the sea was still there, not changed, not altered, only extended. In this way, the end of the voyage did not arrive as a moment. It arrived as a widening of space. The ship had been the path. The whale had been the sign. Now the sea itself became both. No voice remained to tell the story. No deck remained to hold the memory. Only the one who floated between sky and water carried what had been seen, and the sea carried him. Not toward a known shore, not toward a promised place, but forward upon its endless surface. Thus ended the voyage, not with return, not with triumph, but with a single body resting upon a piece of floating wood, held between two infinities. Above him, the sky passed. Below him, the sea moved. Round him, the world remained open. And in this openness, the story did not close with a sound, but with silence. The sea remained after all motion had passed. It did not hold the memory of the ship in any visible form. No mark upon its surface showed where the hull had gone down. No line upon the horizon revealed the path the whale had taken. The water lay open and unchanged, as though nothing had moved across it. Yet within this unchanged surface, the meaning of what had been carried upon it remained. The whale had passed as all great things pass, not by leaving a trace upon the world, but by shaping the movement of those who followed it. Its body had risen and fallen, pale against the water, and in that motion men had seen more than flesh and bone. They had seen a form that did not belong fully to land or to sky, but to the space between them. To follow such a form was to follow something that could not be held, only approached. The sea itself did not judge this following. It did not call it courage or madness. It did not mark the ship as worthy or unworthy of its path. It accepted the movement of hull and creature alike, carrying both forward without preference. In this way, the ocean did not become a place of conflict. It remained a field in which many motions could exist at once, crossing without meaning except that which men placed upon them. To the ship, the whale had been a purpose. To the men, it had been a sign. To the sea, it had been only another body moving through water. This difference did not lessen the voyage. It only showed that meaning does not rise from the surface of things, but from the way they are seen. The vastness of the ocean did not appear in its storms alone. It appeared more clearly in its calm, when the water lay smooth and wide, when no sail crossed the horizon and no bird marked the sky. The distance between one body and another became difficult to measure. In such moments, the sea did not seem empty. It seemed complete. Its openness did not ask to be filled. It only asked to be crossed. The men who had set their course upon it had done so with maps and instruments, with names for winds and stars, with words for currents and seasons. Yet beneath all these measures, the water remained something that could not be reduced to direction alone. It did not lead always where it appeared to lead. It did not close around those who entered it with any fixed meaning. It allowed the voyage to take shape, then let it dissolve. In this way, the sea became more than a place. It became a movement that did not belong to any single path. Ships entered it and left it. Whales rose within it and sank again. Men marked it with lines upon paper and forgot those lines when the water no longer showed them. What remained was not the route taken, but the act of moving across something that did not end. The whale itself, in its pale form, had carried a different weight. Its color did not belong to shadow or to depth. It did not blend with the water as other bodies did. It stood apart not by size alone, but by contrast. Against the long blue and gray of the sea, its whiteness did not explain itself. It did not show whether it belonged to light or to absence. It moved as something both visible and withdrawn. To some, this whiteness suggested meaning. To others, it suggested only surface. Yet in either case, it drew the eye and held it. It became a center round which thought gathered, not because it spoke, but because it did not. The whale did not declare itself. It did not turn to meet the gaze of those who watched it. It rose and sank according to its own motion, leaving others to shape their own interpretations. In this, it became a mirror of the sea itself. Both carried forms that could be seen, yet neither offered an answer to what they were. The ship had once seemed a strong and steady thing upon this water. Its planks had held firm against wind and wave. Its masts had carried sails that cut the air and drew the hull forward. Its deck had given men a place to stand and to name the world around them. Yet when it passed into the sea, it did not change the water's surface for long. The ocean closed over it as it had closed over countless forms before. In this closing, there was no anger. There was no triumph. There was only continuation. The sea did not become fuller by taking the ship. It did not become emptier by letting it go. It remained what it had been, a field of motion without fixed edge. What had seemed solid upon it became part of its depth. What had seemed lasting became part of its passing. Thus, the voyage did not end in destruction alone. It ended in return, not to land, but to the element that had carried it from the first. The ship became water. The path became surface. The purpose became memory. The man who floated upon the small piece of wood did not hold the sea beneath him. As a master holds a tool, he was held by it as a body is held by air. His movement did not shape the water. It followed it. He did not choose his direction. He accepted it. In this acceptance, the difference between the great and the small grew clear. The whale had moved with the force of its body. The ship had moved with the force of its design. The man moved with the force of the sea alone. Yet this did not make him less real upon its surface. He existed there as truly as the creature that had passed before him and the vessel that had carried him to that place. The water did not separate them by importance. It held them all within the same space of motion. So too with the story that had been carried upon it. The pursuit, the meeting, the loss, and the remaining silence did not arrange themselves into a single lesson. They remained as movements that had crossed one another and then passed on. The sea did not preserve them as events. It dissolved them into time. Those who would later hear of this voyage would not see the water as it had been seen from the deck. They would not feel the slow lift of the hull beneath their feet. They would not watch the pale form rise and sink ahead of their course. They would know it only as words shaped into order. Yet even these words would carry something of the movement that had taken place. They would not explain the sea. They would not define the whale. They would only mark the passage of a ship across something that could not be fully crossed. In this way, the voyage would continue, not upon water, but within thought. The whale would rise again, not from the surface of the ocean, but from the surface of memory. The ship would sail again, not by wind, but by the turning of pages and the steady flow of voice. And the sea would remain as it had always been, beneath and beyond all telling. It would not appear in full within any story. It would show only enough of itself to suggest what lay beyond the edge of speech. Thus, what remained after the last motion was not an ending, but a widening. The water did not close the path of the voyage. It opened it into a space without boundary. The whale did not vanish into meaning. It passed into the depth from which meaning had been drawn. And the man who floated between sky and sea did not stand as a victor or as a witness alone. He stood as a part of the same motion that had carried ship and creature alike. He rested upon what could not be held and was carried by what could not be seen. In this resting, the voyage found its final form, not as a line drawn from port to horizon, but as a movement that had no fixed end. The sea did not say that it was finished. It only continued to move. Above it, the sky passed in long, quiet changes of light. Below it, the depths remained without voice. Upon it, small shapes rose and fell for a time, then were taken into its wide field. So the story does not close upon the water. It drifts upon it. It does not stand as a monument. It moves as the sea moves, without sound and without boundary. And in that motion, there is no need for further pursuit, no need for further naming. The whale has passed, the ship has passed, the path has passed. What remains is the open surface, carrying forward what cannot be held, and allowing all things to move within it, until even movement itself becomes part of stillness. This is the end of tonight's story. Thank you for listening. May the sound of the sea guide you into sleep.